story began with an explanation of who the adventurers were. They took missions from guild branches scattered across many countries and earned a living by completing tasks that promised rewards. Their jobs ranged from fighting monsters and delivering materials to dozens of other dangerous assignments. Some adventurers became famous heroes after defeating fierce dragons that threatened entire states, while others returned from deep dungeons with priceless treasures and wealth. In such a world, countless people chased dreams of glory and adventure. In the Adventures Guild branch in Boltana, someone loudly called out, "Next!" Main character Ark. He excitedly thought to himself that their adventure was finally about to begin. While he was standing in line, he heard someone nervously humming to themselves in panic. Turning to his childhood friend Lion, Ark calmly and gently told her not to worry because their turn for the appraisal was very soon. He asked what was troubling her. Ark firmly took her hand, squeezed it reassuringly, smiled crookedly, and nervously asked if he was not worried at all. She admitted that she had been thinking all the time about what abilities she would have. Ark looked at her for a moment, stunned by how beautiful she had become. Noticing his silence, Lin asked if everything was all right. Ark quickly waved it off. He even got embarrassed. He said confidently that if it was Lin, then everything would undoubtedly be fine. Looking at her, Ark remembered their past. They grew up in the same village and dreamed of becoming adventurers since childhood. Together, they left their native village to chase those dreams, but deep down, Ark held another plan. When he and they earned enough money as adventurers, he wanted to buy a ring and confess his feelings to her. Finally, the worker called the next person. Both Ark and Lin immediately turned towards the voice. Lin nervously whispered that it was finally her turn and asked Ark what she should do. Suddenly, Ark suggested that Lin go first. Lin froze in surprise. But Ark jokingly stated that if it turned out he had some crazy power, it might feel overshadowed afterward. Smiling arrogantly, he said he would first let it enjoy its moment of glory. Lin muttered embarrassedly, not understanding what he was talking about, but eventually stepped forward and agreed to go first. After a few moments, a shocked voice suddenly echoed throughout the guild hall. "What is this?" The woman conducting the evaluation stared at the results for a long time, not believing her eyes, then suddenly exclaimed that Lin's abilities were at hero level. She announced that Lin's level cap was 80 and that she had access to the skills Sacred Magic, High Priestess, and Goddess's Blessing. In frozen confusion when suddenly, Adavidra suddenly exploded with shock. Someone exclaimed that the level 80 limit is incredibly high. Another added that skills like Priest usually stay around level 30, so Lena's abilities are exceptional. One man even beamed, insisting that 3 such strong skills are unheard of, and the crowd continued to praise her. Incredible, a true hero. Guild staff smiled warmly and caught the applause in honor of Lin. Everyone in the guild supported her and expressed hopes that she would succeed as a traveler. Their emotions were overwhelming. Lin nervously thanks everyone and politely bowing steps back. Her face flushed with embarrassment and she hurried back to Ark. Meanwhile, Ark remained frozen in shock after the evaluation results. Regaining composure, he proudly told Lin that she was truly incredible. Lin awkwardly smiled and admitted that the results surprised her too. Ark loudly declared that Lin definitely should become a priestess. Lin happily agreed, just saying that Ark would also undoubtedly become something impressive. After a short pause, she guessed that he would most likely become a fencer or maybe even a holy knight. Mark confidently told her, "Leave it to me." Meanwhile, the worker called the next one excitedly. Art stepped forward and Lin cheerfully encouraged him, "Do your best." Art calmly replied that he didn't need to try at all. Standing before the employee, Ark introduced himself and asked to be registered as a traveler. The woman nodded and ordered him to place his hand on the crystal ball for evaluation. When Ark complied, the crowd began whispering among themselves. Some recognized him as the girl's companion from earlier, others commented on how young he looked. Some wondered if he might also have some incredible abilities, especially after Lin's impressive results. Ark quietly prayed to himself. He knew everything would be decided at this moment. More than anything, he desired the strength to protect Lin. The woman silently awaited the crystal's result. Suddenly her face blazed bright red as she tried to suppress laughter. Ark looked at her in surprise, shuddering from the stifled giggle. The woman apologized and only then finally announced his results. His level limit was 1. The entire guild hall fell silent, and then, after a short pause, the room exploded with laughter. One man shouted in shock, asking if it was even possible to reach a level cap of 1. Someone claimed they had never heard of such a thing before. Another noted that in Ark there is only one spell, instant death, called Success Unseen. The crowd continued to mock him, derisively calling his abilities quirky and ugly. One man loudly declared that Ark is the weakest mage in all humanity. Lin quickly called him, sharply breaking his frozen stupor. Worried, she cautiously suggested leaving the guild at least for a short time, or quietly agreed. When they reached the corner of Guild Hall, confusion and irritation grew in Art's head. He couldn't understand why he was born with such a useless cap level. The crowd's words painfully echoed in his mind. Lin silently watched him, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, a man approached them and greeted Lin just as casually. Behind him stood several other adventurers. The man introduced himself as Alan, the leader of the S-rank party. Art's eyes suddenly widened in surprise. Then Alan sharply turned to Lin and directly asked her to join his Gungas, their priestess. Frozen frosty shock. From the crowd, someone immediately reacted with complete disbelief, asked if this was really the party of the famous Alan. The crowd buzzed with excitement. People were talking among themselves. Someone asked if this was the same group with all the max-level monsters, and another replied with delight that they were the real deal. Someone else added, apparently the party was entrusted with a mission directly from the king. One voice shook at the beauty walking beside them, but someone nearby quickly tugged, saying, "Stop it," as the commotion grew and became louder. Beads of sweat appeared on Ark's face. Someone exclaimed in shock that being recruited into the S-rank party so quickly after registration was simply incredible. Another noted that this boy was truly exceptional, even though he was a complete novice. Why did they want her? Showing that she was only level 1, a complete beginner adventurer, Alan told his group to wait for him outside, assuring them he would be back soon. Returning to Lion, he explained that her doubts were completely understandable, but there was nothing to fear. He confidently stated if she joined his party, her level would rapidly increase. According to him, they had nothing left to do but admire her incredible talent. For now, our fists were clenched and confusion spread in his mind. Couldn't even grasp what it truly meant to be S-rank. Then Alan asked Lin if she would lend her skills for the sake of the people. Ark immediately dismissed this thought in his mind. For him, the answer was obvious no. However, Lin silently lowered her gaze and fell into contemplation. Ark looked at her with wide-open eyes. He didn't understand why she looked so worried. It spun in his head why she didn't refuse immediately with a single word. Suddenly, memories surfaced. Once someone called him, shouting his name. Ark turned toward the voice and answered indifferently. Then he was asked if he really intended to become an adventurer. Ark smiled brightly and declared that he definitely would. Someday, he said proudly, his book would surely be published. Lin replied quietly, when that day comes, Ark should not forget before the memory can continue. Lin's voice shook Ark's thoughts. She sharply lowered her head and begged Alan to invite her to the party. Ark froze completely in utter shock. Alan immediately thanked her and praised her choice a brilliant decision. Without hesitation, he grabbed Lin's hand and suggested they quickly prepare her equipment. Excited, he explained that he would teach her the proper attitude of an adventurer and personally accompany her on this path. Anva's sleeve trembled wildly in despair. He called her name and ordered her to wait. He reached out, trying to stop her. But Alan quickly stared and blocked his hand, not letting him grab hers. Alan looked suspiciously and asked who he was. Ark could only stare frozen in response, yet quietly whispered, "Lean." He softly called back, and the art seemed to look at her with reliable eyes. Alan suddenly smiled boldly, and a sudden realization appeared on his face. He apologized indifferently, saying that he had confused Ark with some thug. Placing his hand on Ark's shoulder, Alan recalled that he had already heard this name and was confident that he understood the situation well enough. He said, "It's unfortunate, but such things happen constantly in the world of adventures." According to him, it was a common matter. Ark struggled to squeeze out words and insisted that there could be no mistake here. She even burst into tears, saying that Lean was important to him and reminded him of their promise to travel together. Alan responded with a calm nod, as if to say that's how it is. But with the same self-satisfied grin, he told Ark that despite everything, Lion still makes the right choice. Alan asked Ark if he had ever truly thought about what his new ability means. According to Alan, everything in life was predetermined from birth. He explained that these powers are blessings granted by the gods themselves. Ark looked at him, and conflicting feelings intertwined in his eyes. Alan continued and said, "Among ordinary people, only a few chosen ones with extraordinary abilities are born. According to him, these people go beyond normal humans. In his eyes, they are the chosen ones." Then he explained, "When such gifted individuals are placed in an environment that fully nurtures their talents, miracles happen by themselves." And then Alan directly addressed Ark and asked if he was truly capable of supporting his friend in this world. The conversation ended. Ark stood motionless by the door, and Alan's words echoed again and again in his head. He could not stop wondering what kind of future truly belonged to him. Nearby, a man quietly whispered, asking how much longer Ark intended to stand there without moving. Another replied that honestly it was painful to watch, but that one in turn bitterly muttered about Ark's skill. Unable to hide his disgust, Ark clenched his teeth tightly and forced himself to move. In his thoughts he repeated, "This is not the end yet." He convinced himself that the ability was useless anyway, as soon as he rushed through the door. But someone suddenly collided with him with colossal force, and he crashed to the ground with a thud. A dramatic voice roared painfully, groaning, and Ark silently gasped hoarsely. When his body hit the floor, he froze. Raising his eyes, he saw eyes widened with fear. Above him loomed a giant man with a threatening stature. The man stared coldly at him and ordered him to step back, calling him trash without hesitation. Fear immediately flared in Ark's eyes. Nearby, a girl boldly squinted and said that the insult was too harsh for such a minor incident. Another woman laughed cheerfully and asked if it was really normal to call someone trash just because they bumped into each other. Then she turned to Ark and pointed out that he was just standing there as if frozen. Mockingly, she asked if he really honestly believed that he was about to be killed. She casually added that she definitely hadn't heard any such serious noise. Finishing the phrase with a playful meow, Ark nervously trembled under that pressure. At that moment, some other man suddenly noticed the big warrior and poked him in the side. Someone asked if that intimidating guy was not taking too much risk. As soon as he was recognized, it was Balzac, the berserker from S-Class. People around reacted with fear. They called Balzac a monster beyond ordinary understanding. Someone else whispered that just his loudness scared them to trembling and wondered if he would kill someone if they spoke carelessly near him. Another asked why a warrior like Balzac even needed to come to Voltana. Immediately, a man spoke about Alan from earlier, saying there was something suspicious about him. He asked a woman named Emmy to express her opinion. Emmy responded sharply. They clearly understood nothing. Meanwhile, Balzac himself looked irritated and barked sharply that the whole situation annoyed him. He ordered everyone to leave quickly to finish their business immediately. Playful woman deflected with a question about whose fault caused this chaos and again ended the phrase with meow. Seizing the moment of distraction, Ark quickly got to his feet. Someone hissed in surprise when the woman suddenly shouted that he had escaped. Another man laughed, having no idea what the problem with Ark actually was. The crowd burst out laughing as Ark slipped away into the sea of people. Suddenly, another surprised sigh echoed throughout the area and Ark instinctively turned around. He realized that countless eyes were staring at him right in the face. The gazes were cold, mocking, and full of contempt. A whisper spread through the crowd like poison: weakling, trash, scoundrel, unbearable. They demanded with a desperate cry that they finally stop. Another voice repeated Alan's previous question whether he was really capable of handling such a reality. Completely stunned by the looks and mockery, Ark finally turned around and dashed away. While fleeing, someone behind muttered in confusion. I was curious about what exactly was wrong with him. Eventually, Ark rushed forward all the way to the forest. Ark was gasping heavily and nervousness reflected in his eyes. After a dark and terrifying man had fiercely glared at him earlier, his memories blurred into a dense fog. In panic, he blindly rushed into the nearest forest. And now, without Lena nearby, he suddenly got completely lost. It already seemed too late to change anything for Ark, above all else. He couldn't stop thinking that he was a nobody. In a city teeming with adventurers, even the weak had their purpose somewhere. But Ark felt as if he alone had no place where he truly belonged. Suddenly, the forest was cut by a rustling sound. Ark flinched in shock as something jumped out of the grass. In a moment, he calmed down and exhaled with relief. Only Sliz stood before him. With bitterness on his face, Ark whispered that it was quite a slippery surprise, but suddenly a thought struck him. Since he was already here, wasn't it time to finally test his skill through his own experience? He kept recalling over and over the words that his instant death magic was a complete failure, supposedly unable to even defeat the weakest slime, but the truth was different. Ark did not understand at all how this skill worked, tried to remember the spell, and quietly whispered a single word: death. At that moment, a black aura in the form of a skull suddenly appeared before him. He convulsively froze and nervously stood still, so it was an instant death magic. Honestly, it looked even more terrible than he had imagined. Looking at the black skull hanging in the air, he had no idea why it took such a sinister shape. His eyes widened in surprise. While the skull slowly drifted toward the slime, he nervously twitched in anxiety. He wondered what would happen next even if he was only level 1. If the spell worked at all, it meant there was still hope for him. But as soon as the skull approached the slime, it slowly faded away, dissolving into emptiness. We froze, gasping in disbelief. It missed. In despair, he shouted to try it again. Another black skull appeared and flew toward the slime, but as before, it disappeared without accomplishing anything. Art froze with an empty gaze. In the end, nothing happened at all. Suddenly, a sharp wave of exhaustion overwhelmed him. Art took a painful breath. His strength was melting away in his body. He had no idea if this was exactly how it happened when magical power was consumed for the first time. After such a heavy price and devoted energy, all he achieved resulted in a complete failure. He couldn't even defeat a single slime. A bitter smirk appeared on his face. When memories from earlier times surfaced in his mind, an empty laugh escaped his lips full of despair. Slowly, Ark broke down and fell to his knees. Lean's voice echoed clearly in his thoughts. "It's a promise, Ark. Someday let me join your party, okay?" Ark clenched his teeth tighter and tighter, one after another. Memories of Lean flashed before his eyes. He saw the younger Lean with innocent, shining eyes cheerfully calling his name. Then another memory appeared. She was a bit older but still smiling warmly, calling him again. More and more memories followed each, showing how Lean gradually grew, and every time she said his name, he beamed with a smile. Finally, the last image appears before him. He limps along behind, while Alan walks beside, moving away. Art screamed and tears of despair flowed down his face without stopping. Alone in the silence of the forest, his pitiful cries echoed through the darkness of the night's depth. The wind softly rustled through the trees, filling the forest with gentle whispers. Ark slowly calmed down as soon as the wind began to blow. He sat silently among the shadows of the forest. In deep thought, he told himself, there is no point in staying here forever. Nothing awaited him ahead anymore. Maybe returning to his hometown is the only choice left. Suddenly, the slime from before jumped up and appeared in front of him. Art blinked in surprise, then recognized it. He muttered that it turns out the slime still hasn't gone anywhere. Having measured everything more carefully, he suddenly realized a rather funny thing. The slime is the weakest of all monsters, and he himself is the weakest of all adventurers. As painful as it sounded, they were almost like comrades. With a short sigh, Ark apologized to the slobberer for what had happened earlier. He pushed himself to his feet again and decided it was finally time to return, but suddenly he froze mid-step. A giant shadow was crawling on the ground before him. Slowly, Ark looked up and his whole body was frozen with fear. Above him loomed a colossal beast. His eyes widened as soon as he recognized the monstrous bear in front of him. Even the slime nearby shuddered with fear. The massive creature flicked its tongue forward and stuck it out. Before raising his huge paw to attack, Ark froze nervously, staring at the beast. But the slug quickly jumped away from danger. The bear let out a deep growl and lunged forward without any warning. Ark shouted a warning but barely managed to dodge through himself to the side. After catching his breath, he muttered that the strike was too close, and then it dawned on him. The monster before him was a deadly bear, a creature so dangerous that only C-rank adventurers were advised to kill it. There was no reason for such a monster to reach him, a novice. Panic overwhelmed his thoughts as he puzzled over why a creature of that level appeared so close to civilization. No matter how he looked at it, the situation was catastrophic. If it continued like this, they would be killed. Ark rushed to run away and, screaming wildly, ran at full speed, saving his own life. But the bear attacked again. It struck like a wave of scent tearing through the air, and Skaz cracked against the tree hard with a crippling blow. He coughed painfully. Blood spurted from his mouth. Pain spread through his body and bitter thoughts filled his mind. Could this really be the end awaiting someone like him, a worthless, weak adventurer, discarded like trash, dying at level 1, having achieved nothing? The beast slowly crawled towards him, confident with all its being the next attack would kill. His old childhood friend had abandoned him, other travelers mocked, and he vanished as if he were nothing, a tiny insect. Such a miserable end awaited him. Ark clenched his teeth tightly. He refused to accept it through trembling inhales and exhales. He grumbled that he would not die here. He did not even manage to start the journey. So far he has gained nothing. The bear roared so loudly that it thundered, looming over him like a giant. At that moment, Ark snapped his hand forward and, overwhelmed by panic, cast a spell. Dark shadows spilled from his palm and black skulls appeared, howling and lunging at the beast. Sinister magic struck right at Killing Bear. The monster whined piercingly from the raging pain. Deafening like a blow to the very ear, it thundered, echoing through the whole forest, and suddenly everything fell silent. Slowly Ark opened his eyes. His breath caught in shock when he saw a huge bear lying motionless on the ground. His jaws hung open, and his lifeless eyes stared motionlessly and emptily ahead. Carefully, Ark approached the creature and made sure it was really dead, and because of this, he could not believe it. He grumbled that the monster was completely lifeless. Then it dawned on him his instant death spell had worked. Ark sighed as if his strength was gone and fell to the ground. In a moment, a wave of joy overwhelmed him. He burst out laughing and exclaimed that he had actually survived. For the first time in a long while, relief spread across his face. Before he could properly rest, suddenly a strange light flashed nearby, and in the very center of the glow, a mysterious presence slowly appeared. When the bright beam engulfed everything around, Ark stared at it, not understanding what was happening. Chapter 2 began with a mysterious window that suddenly appeared in the air. Ark froze in shock when he realized his skill level had increased. He couldn't hold back and shouted excitedly to be awarded points. But in a moment he fell silent, looking more closely at the screen hanging in the air. Curiosity gripped him. What was this? And it turned out surprisingly fascinating. He asked if it could track his gaze while he moved around. While Ark continued to look into the window, something about skill levels surfaced in his mind, and he wondered if it was connected to his abilities. As soon as he touched the floating screen with his finger, a quiet melody softly echoed in the air. While he looked ahead, the skull before him suddenly jerked its jaws and opened them wide. The screen trembled, flashing information, and showed basic data: his name Ark and profession Daredevil Magician. Several lines of stats appeared before him. This made him doubt whether they really reflected his own abilities. But his personal level remained at 1, and immediately another fact caught his eye: instant death magic was already at level 20. Slowly figuring out the situation, Ark assumed that the skill itself could develop independently. He had never heard of such an ability, but if it was true, then it explained everything. He really wanted to learn more. He grabbed the window hanging in the air and demanded more details. In response, the screen showed a skill map. Ark was amazed to see that the skills were displayed exactly like that. When he pressed the skill button, additional information appeared. The screen explained the spell's range was too short, so from a distance the chance of success was low. It worked best up close, and by spending points, he could unlock additional effects and abilities. Also, Ark was noted in the mention of effective radius. He recalled how sorcerers and squads usually fought from the rear, far from their targets. Because of this distance, successful cases were almost non-existent, as were records of instant magical kills. Recalling that earlier clash, he realized, when he cast the spell, he was standing almost right next to the killer bear. He was gnawed by the question whether such proximity was the reason the instant death effect worked so amazingly. Then Ark noticed the wounds he inflicted on himself from the bear no longer hurt, as if the level up restored his body just like the usual recovery effect. Having thought everything through to the end, he concluded it was precisely the growth of his skill that was truly the main thing in his case. Given the right abilities, he believed he could still fight effectively, even remaining at level 1. Then he shifted his gaze to the 20 skill points on the map. Not knowing what to choose, he thought to simply distribute them among the abilities that looked promising. Suddenly, new symbols appeared on the screen. Ark gasped in surprise when he noticed another icon emerging before him. Interesting. He muttered that it looked like a coffin and tapped on it. A new explanation window appeared. Supposedly, with the help of instant lethal magic, he could defeat enemies and store their bodies in a separate dimension. Ark froze at this discovery. He immediately realized how useful such an ability could be. Even if he sold the defeated monsters to the guild, he would still have to carry, transport, and disassemble them himself, and that was always difficult. Since the skill had no drawbacks, he decided it was worth taking. Determined to test the new ability, Ark spread his arms and silently cast a spell in his mind. Tomb of the Dead. The bear killer slowly began to disappear. When the huge beast completely vanished from sight, Ark froze in amazement and exclaimed that it was incredible. He again turned his attention to the floating screen and noticed that only a few items remained. Out of curiosity, he asked about another symbol on the map. A new screen appeared and explained that with the help of magic, he could convert part of the defeated target's attributes into his own abilities. Ark froze and asked if that was really possible. Although the skill's cost was high 5 points, its potential seemed incredible, as he was usually the one who could not raise his own stats. The skill appeared to be his greatest hope. Ark was already convinced that the information shown by the system was true. Everything he had seen so far was confirmed, so there was no doubt left. Without hesitation, he decided to acquire this ability. Having spent all the remaining skill points, he reviewed the results and was satisfied with how he allocated them. He also found it incredibly convenient to check his stats directly through the pop-up window instead of relying on appraisal magic. Soon the screen disappeared as if it had dissolved into the air. Ark replayed in his mind everything that happened that day. Although he was almost dead, his heart strangely did not tremble as if the whole experience was phantom. Thanks to pure luck, he woke up with new strength and managed to endure the brink of death. Most importantly, he finally saw a spark of hope. Closing his eyes, Ark focused only on the new goal. Nothing else mattered to him anymore. It seemed that his entire consciousness was consumed by this one passion. Although he did not know how far he could go, he was still ready to challenge fate itself. He decided to think of himself as one who was reborn and was determined to use this opportunity. With new determination, Ark declared, "Once the weakest person of all will become the strongest." The Adventurers Guild branch in Boltana. Emmy's froze in shock. Ark brought the body of a huge monster and asked her to buy it as material, looking at the beast as if she could not believe her own eyes. Emmy could not comprehend what she saw. She immediately recognized this was a killer bear, a monster of the C class or higher. Emmy did not understand how Ark could have such a creature with him, so she asked him in confusion. Ark calmly explained that he defeated it with instant deadly magic. Emmy gasped so sharply that she barely managed to form words. Meanwhile, Ark simply told her to relax. The noise quickly attracted the attention of all the surrounding adventurers. Someone from the crowd recognized Eric, the same weak adventurer from earlier that day. Others wondered where he suddenly got a killer bear, especially since a minute ago he supposedly had no weapons. Some froze, looking at the monster with amazement. They had seen such a creature up close for the first time. Ignoring the crowd, Ark simply repeated that he wanted the guild to buy the monster. Emmy, still completely stunned by shock, hurriedly nodded and agreed. At that very moment, the guild doors suddenly swung open. Ark and Emmy returned to the entrance just as three men associated with the guild's dismantling team entered the building. Deadly killer bear immediately caught their attention. The man in the center blazed with joy and said he had heard rumors high-quality materials were to arrive. One of the others carefully examined the bear and praised its condition. He noted that the valuable part, what was inside the bear, remained perfectly intact despite the fact that such materials usually get damaged during battle. The leader explained that killing bears was deadly dangerous because they were dangerous ranked sea monsters living in ominous forest territories. Battles with them almost never ended without serious injuries on both sides, so the current condition of the monsters was even stranger. Finally, the man who had spoken shouted to Ark and asked if they could buy the materials. Ark immediately agreed and almost begged, "Take them." Then the leader ordered his men to take the monster outside. Workers quickly responded together and then carried out the huge beast Cadilla. Mi apologetically called Ark, making him wait. She placed a bag in front of him and explained, inside were 20 gold coins payment for the monster materials he sold. She also added that the amount included a bonus reward according to the guild's quality standards, especially considering how excellent the condition of the killed she-bear was. When the deal was completed, someone nearby politely greeted Ark. Standing near the guild exit, Ark casually replied and only then left. Emmy forced an icy tight smile watching him go and still couldn't believe what had happened. Once outside the guild, Ark checked the reward and realized he had received much more money than expected. He pondered how useful the coffin of the deceased ability had already become. Now that enough funds were secured for future plans, he headed to the finish and decided the next morning he would start acting earlier. Morning came. Ark entered a shop in the city. The shopkeeper noticed he came so early and commented on his diligence, wondering what brought such a young traveler here. Inside, the same man was shocked. Seeing such youth so focused and serious was unexpected. Ark explained that he wanted to prepare for an easy dungeon walk as a mage. To prove he had money, he showed the man a gold coin. Seeing it, the seller froze with shockingly wide eyes. Instantly changing his attitude, he enthusiastically greeted Ark and addressed him as if he were a respected traveler. The man cheerfully remarked that Ark had so much energy early in the morning for a dungeon trip. After that, the excited merchant began recommending all kinds of supplies. He explained that Ark first needed a lantern and several bags to organize food and water. He also advised reinforcing Ark's armor, emphasizing that the current clothing was unsuitable for dungeon exploration. Exhausted by the endless stream of advice, Ark wearily agreed and ordered the man to take care of everything. Having gathered the equipment, the shopkeeper proudly glanced at Ark's new look and declared that everything on him looked simply fantastic. Then he brought in new goods, potions, portable snacks, and hanging lanterns. For water, he strongly recommended a leather flask, saying it looks stylish and is practical. The man explained that he had prepared just enough supplies in advance to last 1 or 2 days inside the dungeon. After that, he showed a belt pouch made for convenience, emphasizing that it would be very useful because it allows Ark to keep his hands free. Ark agreed, everything sounded perfect, so he decided to buy everything. Sincerely thanking the shopkeeper, he asked the seller if possible to attach a map somewhere among the gear. Ark finally set off towards his goal. While walking, he looked at the map and confirmed, the nearest dungeon is located within the eastern forest. When Ark asked the city guard about the location of the dungeon, he explained, it is about an hour's walk from here. Hearing this, Ark became even more determined and reminded himself, his main priority is to become stronger. For him, the key is to increase his stats through the ability to absorb, which is tied to his instant death magic. Ark was convinced the most effective way to hunt monsters is where they roam freely inside the dungeon, but most adventurers never face demons alone. For Ark, going alone is the only way to break further into the unknown and become stronger. Encouraging himself, Ark firmly declared that he would just try and move forward alone as he is. As soon as he entered the forest, he sighed with relief and noticed that the trail was surprisingly easy for Hikingal thanks to the lively road used by adventurists and travelers. While walking, he noticed several guides and landmarks placed throughout the forest to help people stay on track, following the instructions. While some time passed, Ark continued deeper into the forest. His throat tightened, so he took a sip from his leather water flask. Wiping his mouth, he quietly muttered that he had an F. Finally reached the dungeon of the east, stood before the entrance to the cave. Ark pondered how dungeoneers considered the workplace for adventurers. That was what the records he reread suggested. The dungeon was divided into several layers. Each layer had its own unique structure and environment, so each floor seemed mysterious and unlike the previous one. Of course, the difficulty increased the deeper the travelers descended, but the loot hidden in the lower layers was so valuable that many adventurers willingly risked their lives to seek it. But for Ark, the true reward was not in treasures. The dungeon itself was filled with danger, and clashes with monsters were his main goal. With nervous determination in his gaze, Ark slowly stepped into the cave. For now, he decided to stay on the upper level. He believed they would be enough to test the enhanced powers of his instant death magic. Sneaking deeper into the dungeon, Ark suddenly heard a strange sound. His ears twitched. He sharply turned toward the noise. From the darkness, a pair of legs slowly emerged. Behind them came a whole pack of goblins, who immediately revealed themselves. He was troubled by anxiety, but he remained focused. Ark recognized them immediately. He recalled that goblins were small monsters, each with little strength, but they were smart enough to wield weapons and fight in packs, making them dangerous opponents capable of overwhelming lone travelers. Although goblins were considered low-rank monsters of Class E, Ark understood someone weak like him would be an ideal target for them. The goblins laughed loudly, and their fiercely evil eyes stared closely at him in the silence of the dungeon. Suddenly, one of them jumped into the air and lunged straight at Ark. Despite the attack, Ark remained calm, confidently looking at the enemy flying toward him. Chapter 3 began inside the dungeon. The goblins greeted loudly. One of them desperately charged at Ark. In his thoughts, Ark welcomed the attack joyfully. He believed, in the world of instant death magic, distance is everything. He remembered the effective distance of the effect, which he strengthened yesterday, was now at 1, and the chance of success was at 2. He focused on drawing the enemies as close as possible. When the goblin leapt upward, Ark calmly prepared himself. The moment came. He stretched out his hand, tore the goblin apart, and cast his deadly spell. The black skull lunged forward and hit the creature. The goblins screamed in pain before collapsing helplessly to the ground. Ark celebrated the victory, inside pleased that his plan worked perfectly. The remaining goblins quickly gathered together, began to surround him. At first, Ark flinched but quickly realized they were just being cautious. For him, this was even more advantageous, so he had a better chance to strike. Ark raised his hand again and cast a spell. Another black skull lunged at a goblin and killed him instantly. The goblin nearby screamed in shock. One goblin rushed inside like a whirlwind and attacked Ark, but he instantly dodged the blow. Grabs the creature by the head. Quietly cast the spell again. Death, he whispered. Ark noticed no matter how many times he managed to use his 3-hit combo, the exhaustion he expected never appeared. Moreover, he felt that his body had become significantly faster and more agile. It seemed to be true, as the system window explained. Victories over enemies with instant death magic increase his own stats, with each growth in confidence. Completely destroyed the goblin group. With surprise, he noted that goblins really cannot level up. Excited, he called up his stats window. A floating screen popped up before him and showed his current abilities. Ark realized, despite the improvements in range and success percentage making his magic easier to use, the main question was different: how much his stats had grown after each victory. When he clenched his fist, he felt his body becoming lighter and faster after every defeated enemy. The effects of soul retrieval seemed incredibly powerful. Logically, he thought if this continued, he would eventually be able to use magic infinitely. Suddenly, Ark noticed equipment scattered on the ground. The thought gnawed at him: does the system also allow storing monster equipment? His thoughts were interrupted by a dark passage nearby. Quietly, almost whispering, he muttered that it looked like a side tunnel. He slowly stepped into the darkness with the railing. The deeper he went, the less light reached the surrounding walls, and the narrow tunnel began to press with anxiety. When he looked back, Ark's sense felt something was wrong here. Without warning, a beast emerged from the darkness. The artist's heart froze with surprise. Soon other creatures appeared with impatient growling. The monsters were orcs, fierce beasts resembling large cats, only with a physique better than human. In battle, they preferred heavy weapons, giant clubs and axes. Ark quickly realized that the rank of the monsters coming before him was steadily increasing. The orcs growled fiercely and together rushed at Ark. Dragging heavy weapons, they rushed at him a bit nervously. Ark realized, for their size, they moved amazingly fast. One of the orcs raised his weapon high and brought it down with a heavy blow. Ark quickly dodged the attack. Immediately cast a spell. A black skull surrounded the orc, forcing him to fall to his knees and scream from unbearable pain. Ark noticed, unlike goblins, orcs charged into attack without any hesitation. Another orc lunged at him with weapon ready to strike. Ark watched carefully and suddenly realized that now he could clearly see exactly where they would hit. With this awareness, he sharply dodged once more and met the next enemy. He quickly rushed toward the orc flying at him, activated his spell, and struck at close range. Moments later, the orc helplessly fell to the ground. One of the remaining orcs began to sweat nervously. Ark let out a quiet sigh and realized that earlier he simply wouldn't have been able to dodge attacks so easily. Even the very first absorption of stats had already significantly increased his speed. Although he initially planned to focus on enhancing the effective range of his magic, now he understood he could create close combat perfectly tailored to his instant death. He stood calmly amid the orcs surrounding him. Ark watched as they attacked together, their eyes widened in shock when he suddenly disappeared from their sight. Going around him from behind, Ark admitted he himself could not believe how fast they were moving. The orcs shuddered from surprise. Resolutely stepping forward, Ark announced that only 3 enemies remained. Fear flared in their eyes. Ark easily apologized too. Before saying the spell again, he directed it at one of the trembling monsters. After the battle, Ark casually took his snacks and gnawed on them while pondering the results. Even after he defeated 5 more orcs, his level did not increase. It turned out that higher rank monsters gave less experience than hunting bears. While resting, Ark remembered that orc meat is considered truly tasty, and since he already preserved the bodies, he thought he would sell them later and probably get a good sum. Suddenly, Ark stopped. He noticed stairs appearing deep inside rocky dungeon. Below, he saw a faint glow of light. Curious, he descended the stairs and squinted as bright light filled his vision. Continuing deeper, he froze and looked around widely in amazement. Above him, strange glowing stones embedded in the ceiling illuminated the entire room. Before him stretched a stunning view. A massive underground forest with a river flowing right inside. Ark could hardly believe his own eyes. He wondered if this was a sign of changes between dungeon layers, because here it no longer felt like he was in a dungeon. With such bright lighting, he realized he no longer needed a lantern. Suddenly, a voice called him. Ark froze in surprise. He understood. It sounds like people are talking somewhere nearby. Ark waved back, wondering if there were other travelers nearby, having no idea where such a sudden commotion came from. He watched as 3 travelers hurriedly ran straight towards him. The man grabbed Ark by the shoulders and asked if he was okay. Seeing their reaction, Ark was confused and asked if something had happened. Another man stepped forward, not believing his eyes, and pointed out that a child was wandering alone in a dangerous place. The bearded man shouted that Ark was not in his right mind and that it was natural for them to worry about him. The bearded man stared intently at Ark and asked how he had managed to get so far alone. Then he inquired if Ark was injured. Ark casually explained he had fought with several monsters, but those were minor things, nothing serious, so there was no need to worry. The men were stunned by his answer. One of them asked if Ark had gone into battle alone because he wanted to die. Ark immediately rejected this, stating that he had no intention of doing anything like that. Man could not believe that someone would so recklessly explore a dungeon alone. While the man continued to firmly grip Ark's shoulder, a woman quietly and without fuss brushed his hand away. She calmly said, since Ark was fine, that should be the end of it. After that, she explained that they were already returning to the surface and invited Ark to join them. Another man laughed and said that during the expedition they had gathered so much orc meat that it was enough. He urged everyone to return as soon as possible to sell it and get cash. Someone supported him, saying they were lucky to have found Ark in a safe zone, so they all needed to take him back to the city together. Curious, Ark asked what a safe zone was. One of the men explained, dungeons are mysterious places full of strange phenomena. For some reason, there were special areas where monsters could not enter. Adventurers often rested there before moving on or returning to the surface. Realizing this, Ark silently thought there really were so many hidden mechanisms in the dungeon that could be used. Then the man said they needed to leave as soon as possible. But Ark immediately stopped him and said he intended to stay in place. Suddenly, a loud rumble rolled across the territory. Group alarmed turned towards the sound. One more moment and wronged men staggering climbed out of the forest. One of them desperately begged for help. The man immediately rushed to calm him down, reminding them that they were in a safe zone. After that, he called Azura and ordered her to heal the wounded men. Azura quickly cast her healing spells. The wounds essentially began to heal almost instantly. Having ensured his condition, Azura asked how he was feeling. The man replied that he felt much better thanks to her treatment, then asked what exactly had happened. The victim nervously looked at them and asked if they had ever fought skeletons before. Mark was somewhat surprised by this question. One of the travelers muttered that skeletons are the bony brothers of the underworld kingdom. Another explained, undead monsters are indeed troublesome, but low-ranked skeletons usually do not pose a significant threat. The wounded man instantly agreed, saying they had thought the same, but then he explained, the skeleton they had encountered earlier was completely different. The group listened attentively as he began to tell what had happened. Chapter 4 began deep inside the dungeon. A frightened series of voices broke into a scream about a giant skeleton. One of the wounded travelers explained that he had encountered such a creature only once before. Giant monsters with humanoid bodies in other countries were known as ogres or giants. They could grow almost up to 4 meters tall and reach strength like that of Birank, so they were incredibly dangerous opponents. Another traveler could hardly believe it. The man in the hat broke the silence and asked why a monster the size of an ogre appears on the upper floors of the dungeon. He shouted that they were just the Durank adventure team and had no chance against such a creature even if the whole squad gathered. One of the wounded men tried to calm everyone down. He explained that his comrades were hiding near the back wall and he himself escaped by crawling through a narrow passage between the trees. Since the monster was so gigantic, there was no way it could squeeze through that path. He admitted that he had panicked earlier, but now he believed the place had become a safe zone. Hoping for help, he asked if they could take him outside once he rested a little longer. Suddenly, a loud rumble echoed through the dungeon. Art turned at the sound and asked if everyone else heard it too. One of the men nervously said not to scare them like that. But the noise surged again louder than before. Panic quickly spread among the travelers as soon as they realized the sound was approaching. One man muttered in confusion, not understanding exactly where it was coming from. Without warning, a gigantic skeleton climbed up from the cliff. Both Ark and the man beside him froze in shock as this gigantic monster appeared before them. Clutching a huge weapon in his hands, one of the travelers screamed in fear while Ark carefully watched the creature. Despite its gigantic size, the monster incredibly swiftly climbed the rock and rushed after those who were fleeing. Ark was amazed. Even in such a gigantic stature, the creature could jump with incredible agility. Wounded travelers cried out in shock. Unable to believe what they saw, the giant skeleton climbed the rock effortlessly and continued the chase. Then the monster stood silently for a moment. At that moment, every adventurer instinctively realized the colossal chasm between themselves and the entity. The difference in power was boundless. It was as if they had encountered death itself. One of the men froze with fear, trying to understand what someone like him could do against such a monster, and was gathering his resolve. He ordered his comrades to push the creature back and lead the others to the exit. After that, he turned to Ark who was about to tell him to run too, but the words got stuck halfway. Ark had already managed to speed up and was flying straight at the monster. The man shouted in shock when Ark crashed directly into the skeletal ogre. Running forward, Ark realized he really could keep pace with the creature. There was almost no difference in speed. But still, one worry remained on his tongue. Ark immediately cast his instant deadly spell on the skeleton ogre. the giant monster stared in surprise at the approaching skulls. Suddenly, a scream of agony bursts out. Ark silently wondered if instant death magic would work against the undead. Watching the battle unfold, Doug muttered curses under his breath from shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Ark evaded every brutal attack of the monster skeleton with incredible skill. Another traveler silently understood why Ark claimed to have conquered the dungeon alone. But despite everything, the man believed that Ark was only holding the defense. Although Ark continued to use some magic, it did not seem very effective against the skeleton ogre. The man called out to Doug, promising that he would handle the load himself. Doug immediately ordered him to run while there was still time. Meanwhile, while Ark continued fighting the skeleton ogre, he calmly reviewed the situation in his mind. Dodging the monster's blows was possible, but he had already begun to wonder if this creature had some resistance to instant death magic, as he had long lost count of how many spells he had managed to cast, and unfortunately, instant death magic was the only skill he possessed. Ark again rushed at the monster. He thought, if he takes one more step closer right to the edge of its attack range, he will have time to cast one more spell, reaching out his hand. Ark tried to cast instant death again, but nothing happened. His magical power was completely exhausted. At that moment, the skeleton ogre raised its gigantic weapon high above its head, preparing for a devastating strike. Ark whispered through his teeth and burst out an irritated sigh as soon as he realized he was in serious danger. Suddenly, the monster's hand shattered into pieces. Chunks of flesh from the luggage strapped to the monster fell to the ground as Ark froze in shock. In a loud voice, he shouted at the giant creature and, demanding attention, also threateningly called it names. The skeletal ogre turned towards the voice and immediately rushed after the man who had run into the forest. As soon as he got inside the thicket, the giant monster got stuck between the tall trees. Its colossal size limited both movement and attack range. Watching very close, Ark immediately understood. The man had taken away the monster's main advantages: agility and reach of strike. He realized that adventurers rely not only on skills and equipment. He also used the terrain to survive. The skeletal ogre roared madly and began mercilessly knocking down trees, trying to find his target. The man nervously hid behind one of the trees. Knowing that all he had left was time, he still, though reluctantly, took on the role of bait. He hoped that by distracting the monster, others would be able to safely escape and return to the surface. Suddenly, a voice spoke behind him. Ark quietly asked if he was okay. The man flinched from surprise and almost jumped, but Ark gestured for him to be silent. When the man calmed down a bit, he asked why Ark hadn't fled earlier. With his speed, it definitely would have been possible. Ark calmly replied that he intended to defeat the monster. The man stared at him in shocked amazement and asked if he seriously thought he had a chance to win. The magic that had just been shown seemed completely ineffective, even a bit shy. Ark admitted that his instant death magic was difficult to use properly. As soon as the man heard the words instant death and magic, he froze in shock. Grabbing him by the shoulders in an arc, he shouted in shock, asking if instant death really had magic. He called it a sad and useless skill and wondered how anyone could even fight with such a thing. Sharp rumble made the skeletal ogre freeze. Ark quickly covered the man's mouth. Tightly curled up together behind a tree, they held their breath and prayed that the monster would not notice them. After a few moments, the giant creatures slowly passed by their hiding place. When it became safe, Ark whispered that he had actually already defeated all the monsters he had encountered so far with instant deadly magic. But he honestly did not know if the spell would work against the undead. The man covered his face, not believing his own eyes. He muttered that the undead monsters should have been dead from the very beginning. Whether instant death could affect them at all, no one could know, but despite these doubts and fragmentary knowledge, the man could not understand one thing: why Ark was still standing and fighting such a terrible monster. Ark calmly replied that even if he could not defeat the beast, he still intended to remain in the fight. Then he asked the man if the same situation was happening the same way with others. The man admitted if everyone had tried to break out together earlier, there would definitely have been casualties. Ark explained that he was the only one there who actually did not belong to the party. Therefore, he thought, if the worst happened to him, it would not matter to anyone else. After those words, the man fell silent. After thinking a little, he quietly told Ark that he did not believe it at all. Ark continued speaking. Like the man himself who was previously stunned, most people believe power Ark was born with is nothing more than a useless skill. Because of that belief, he never got a chance to truly fight side by side with his party comrades. In the end, he had nothing left but to survive as a wanderer, relying only on his instant death magic. Then Ark said that if he died there because of that skill, it would simply prove Both he and his ability are truly worthless, miserable disappointments. Realizing those words, the man could not hold back. He was gnawed by the thought of where Ark's stubbornness came from. After a moment of silence, the man said to Ark, if they work together, they can make a plan to defeat the monster. In the forest, hiding among the trees, they quietly discussed the strategy. The man eventually asked Ark if he was really ready to carry out such a dangerous plan to the end. Ark replied that now, if he tried to run away, it would be shameful. Moreover, even increasing their chances of victory, even a little, is better than doing nothing. The man smiled upon hearing this. He introduced himself as Gaston and asked Ark's name. Ark answered briefly, his name is Ark. Gaston laughed loudly and said that it was an amazing name. A sudden scream made the skeleton ogre freeze and stop moving. Side by side, Gaston and Ark bravely took battle readiness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chapter 5 began 3 years before when a man suddenly announced that Gaston was dismissed. Confused, Gaston asked what he meant. The man explained that it was not by the will of higher authorities, but because the level limit for candidates for military service was raised. Gaston's limit was only 30. It was not considered bad, but in the current situation, it was no longer enough. Then the man asked everyone, including other candidates, to step back. He told Gaston that they had all worked hard so far. Taken aback, Gaston protested against such a sharp turn. He insisted that even at a lower level, his experience over the years still had great value. Almost losing his voice, Gaston fought to defend himself and shouted at the captain. The captain calmly replied that in their country there were no proper evaluation standards except for level limits and skills. He reassured Gaston, assuring him that the young travelers he had trained had much greater potential and could easily compensate for the lack of his experience. Hearing these words, Gaston fell silent and could not argue. One of the men then asked him if it was true that he was going to leave. Gaston apologized to them. He admitted it was no longer possible to hide that he no longer had the strength, and now the rest was up to them. While the others begged him to stay, Gaston bitterly turned away and insulated himself completely from his comrades. An old memory surfaced in the clear sky of his mind. Gaston rushed forward across the territory while a skeleton orc with a wide smile chased after him. The monster roared deafeningly as it chased its prey. Gaston roared back at it, forcing the creature to rush after him, and simultaneously he wondered how Ark could possibly defeat such a monster. Then he remembered the conversation they had earlier. Ark explained, the monster has an extremely large reach, so it is difficult to get within its effective radius. He also noticed that its magic resistance differs from that of ordinary monsters. Because of this, Ark decided to use instant death magic from afar where the chances of success are higher. Confused, Gaston asked if instant death magic depends on distance. Ark replied that as far as he knew, that is exactly how it works. After thinking a little, Gaston proposed a plan. He told Ark that he himself would become the bait and take the monster's attack on himself. This way he would create a single window for Ark's strike. Ark hesitated and warned him, any hit from the monster even one could kill. But Gaston confidently replied, no matter how it looks, he had served in the military in his time. He believed that even against a stronger opponent, they could hold out as long as they maintained defense and did not try to win at all costs. And then another memory flashed in his mind, Gaston helplessly standing in the rain after defeat. Because of this, Gaston firmly told himself he became an adventurer, not to run away again. When the monster approached, Gaston did not move. He stood still and calmly waited. He planned to lure the creature into a narrow forest passage because obstacles in place would prevent it from effectively using wide sweeping attacks and heavy hammers. Monster's attack options were reduced to sword strikes. When the skeletal ogre raised its sword high above its head, Gaston carefully watched its movements. He was curious whether it was preparing for a powerful vertical strike. Remembering Ark's advice about where to hit vulnerable spots, Gaston positioned himself so that a large tree stood behind his back. Thighs was supposed to limit the monster's movements. But still, the monster suddenly lunged forward with incredible speed. Gaston immediately realized, instead of slashing from above, the creature decided to thrust its sword straight into him. He was aware that he was weaker and slower than the monster, but still believed he could manage if the attacks flew directly at him. In his mind, he quickly formulated a plan. As soon as the monster lunged into attack, he would move forward, not retreat. He knew, if he hesitated even for a moment, he would die immediately. When Gaston rushed forward toward the monster, he coldly analyzed the chasm between their abilities. Forward with his chest, he would not withstand even a full-fledged blow. Instead, he intended to disrupt the monster's rhythm, step forward exactly at the critical moment and weaken the force of the blow, but the plan failed. The sword monster struck directly into Gaston's shield at an angle. The explosive blow jerked his entire body, and he sharply and loudly gasped from the blow. The shield instantly shattered in half. Without giving him time to recover, the monster immediately launched another attack. At that very moment, Ark rushed forward from behind the monster. Gaston shouted to him while Ark, without taking his eyes off, charged forward with determination in his eyes. Gaston deliberately lost his balance, completely losing his footing to create a breach. Noticing the chance, Art decided that he was finally close enough. Confidently, he prepared his spell and cast instant death magic. But suddenly, an invisible force stopped Ark in midair. Stunned, Ark muttered something incoherent, not understanding what had happened. In the next moment, the monster struck him with a powerful blow to the torso, and he flew through the air further like a projectile. Gaston froze in horror. He realized the monster had hidden another hand as a secret weapon. It seemed the creature somehow pulled out and subordinated a hand from the corpse of another ogre. Ark screamed in pain, crashing into the ground. Frightened, Gaston called out to him, but before he could answer, a skeletal ogre suddenly appeared before him. In a swift moment, the monster tore to pieces the armor that Gaston was wearing. Art's eyes suddenly widened in shock. After a long return to consciousness, Art forced himself to stand up. He realized he had fainted for only a moment. When panic hit, he immediately began searching for Gaston. When the monster passed by him, Art shuddered with fear. Then Gaston finally appeared in sight. Seeing his condition, Ark was momentarily gripped by inner fear. He understood the situation had already become catastrophic. Enduring terrible pain, Ark still forced his body to move, but he quickly realized, although he was not completely immobilized, he could no longer dodge blows and close in so quickly. And worst of all, the monster's hidden hand made both attack and defense even more dangerous. Gnashing his teeth in despair, Ark frantically searched for any solution. He forced himself to think about anything, but no answer surfaced in his mind. Suddenly, the memory of those cold, boldly watchful eyes resurfaced in his thoughts. A cruel voice echoed again in his head, calling him worthless. For now, Gaston did not take his eyes off the monster. It was slowly approaching. His body trembled with fear, and he quietly cursed to himself. Deep down, he already knew this battle could end in defeat. In his thoughts, Gaston persuaded himself that if Ark was still alive, this time he had to run. He was sure fleeing was the right decision, and despair filled his head. Images of his party members surfaced before him. He silently apologized to Doug and Ashery, recalling the good moments they had shared during their adventures. Then Gaston slowly lifted his gaze upward, to shock. Ark suddenly appeared high above the monster, leapt into the air, and plunged down. Gaston froze, not believing his eyes, not understanding what Ark was doing. Meanwhile, Ark curled up, gathered himself, and thought this would be their last chance. He decided to use gravity attack from above with one sharp move. He just needed to latch onto the monster's body and cast his instant deadly spell directly on it. Suddenly, the skeleton ogre turned and let out a thunderous roar. Gaston's eyes widened in horror as the monster immediately lunged at Ark, who was still hanging in the air. But at the last moment, Ark barely dodged the deadly blow. Using the corpse of the fallen orc as cover, Gaston could only stand frozen in shock. Ark then activated his skill dead coffin casket of the departed and confidently declared that it was time to end the fight. Leaping right over the monster, Ark unleashed his instant death like a whirlwind. In his mind, he shouted fiercely and cast the spell directly at the skeleton ogre. Meanwhile, much deeper in the dungeon, other travelers froze as the monsters roared deafeningly again. Doug immediately recognized the sound and paled at the thought of what was happening to Gaston and Ark. And at that moment, one of the frightened travelers tremulously suggested surrendering. The man insisted that it would take very little time before the monster killed everyone, and insisted they must retreat before it reached them. Hearing these words, Doug angrily grabbed the man by the collar and shouted for him not to insult Gaston. He firmly believed Gaston would protect everyone. Before the argument could escalate, another voice came from the side. Everyone was ordered to remain calm. Snapping from helplessness and anger, Dag rushed outside, cursing the situation, and bitterly muttered that he could do nothing. Suddenly, trees around them wildly roared and swayed from trembling. Doug froze, stopped in place. Skeletal ogre. Suddenly, a monster burst out of the forest and let out another terrifying roar. Doug and Azuri froze in fear as the creature appeared right before them. Suddenly, the creatures froze and stopped moving. His eyes lost all life. They became dull and empty. A few moments later, the giant monster fell to its knees and immediately collapsed heavily to the ground. When the dust and smoke slowly parted, Doug flinched from surprise. Two figures appeared one after another from the fog. These were Ark and Gaston. Doug froze for a moment in complete disbelief, then finally let out a deep sigh of relief. Without wasting a second, he, together with Azure, rushed to the two survivors. Doug jumped with excitement and relief as soon as he realized they had returned alive. Chapter 6 began with some man looking fiercely and coldly at Ark and calling him Oni-chan. He said he could no longer remain silent. He stood threateningly in front of Ark while Ark remained kneeling, holding his humiliating pose, not even understanding why he was sitting like that at all. The man interrogated Ark whether he was really a traveler and what his rank was. Reluctantly, Ark answered that his rank was E. Hearing this, the man twitched in surprise and pointed. E is the starting rank for complete beginners. He demanded angrily that he be answered. Does Ark really claim that he gathered all those materials himself? Ark nervously replied that it would be hard to prove, but it was true. In his thoughts, he replayed how those materials were first distributed to Gaston and others. Even when they were redistributed, everyone still kept a considerable share. After they parted ways with Gaston's party, Art decided to lay out his belongings as soon as he returned to the city. As soon as he began to explain, another voice interrupted him saying he was just a porter for some traveling group. The man replied that such an explanation at least made sense. However, Ark calmly stated that he did not belong to any party. The man called out to him again and asked if Ark even realized that with his words he had cornered himself. Irritated, the man scratched the back of his head and admitted he could not say whether Ark was lying or just foolishly sincere. Then he explained that if the materials were true, completely legal, Ark should have sold them at the main guild on the main street. He asked why Ark instead went all the way to a suspicious shop hidden in an alley. In his opinion, that alone proved the situation was abnormal. Confused, Ark innocently asked if that meant the store itself was somehow abnormal. The man immediately flinched and answered harshly in a broken manner that he meant something completely different. Then Ark began to explain the real reason. He said that at first he intended to go to the guild, but problems arose because previously, after he brought high-rarity materials, he immediately attracted attention. Suspicious adventurers approached him and, having no evidence, accused him of stealing materials. They demanded that he give everything back. The situation escalated when one of the men threatened Ark and attacked him. Ark, forced to defend himself, fought back, and this caused a wild commotion in the guild. Art noted that fighting within the guild is considered a violation, so probably he won't be able to show up there in public for a few days. Then the man asked what kind of travelers they were. Ark was initially a bit confused, but eventually described them as a level 20 party led by a man with long hair tied back. But Ark clarified. During the incident, the leader was the first to run away. Realizing that story, the man quietly muttered to himself that this boy is causing trouble again. Thanks to curiosity, Ark asked if he knew him, but the man only replied that he did. The man admitted that this situation explains why Ark decided to sell materials outside the guild. He explained, depending on the quality of the materials and the traveler's abilities, victory over the orcs may still seem plausible. However, as soon as the described monster Ark entered, the man firmly declared, no Reincarnated adventurer could defeat it alone. Ark looked at the man and calmly said that if he promised not to get angry, Ark would explain everything. Then he admitted that the monster was a skeleton ogre he had encountered in the eastern hideout. At that time, he made acquaintance with a squad led by a man named Gaston. Hearing the name, the man twitched in surprise and asked if he meant Gaston, the former soldier. Ark silently looked at him, and the man quickly apologized and told him to continue. Ark explained that, although he was initially alone, he later joined Gaston's company to defeat the monster using instant deadly magic. Finishing the explanation, Ark asked if the man believed what was said. He skeptically tilted his head and doubted the very idea of instant death. He admitted that if such magic worked, it would kill with one blow regardless of level or rank difference. However, he immediately added that casting it so precisely is almost impossible, so the whole story sounds ridiculous and absurd. Ark silently considered that it really does seem impossible, but the man eventually sighed heavily and admitted, if Gaston really helped Ark, then maybe the story is not entirely unbelievable. Realizing this, Ark felt relieved and once again was convinced. The trust Gaston earned from people is truly boundless. He could not have imagined that Gaston's reputation would come in handy even after they parted ways. Breaking the silence, the man finally gave Ark a thumbs up and declared that now he understood everything. He agreed to buy all the materials at once and promised not to complain anymore. Ark was a little surprised by such a sudden change of mood. The man explained that for him it was still business, so he would lower the price of Beta's insurance in case some hidden trouble surfaced. Then he asked if Ark was satisfied with this arrangement. Ark immediately agreed without any objections. Pleased, the man energetically told him to wait a minute. While sorting the monsters, Ark noticed a black cloak nearby and asked where it was from. The man picked it up and asked if Ark liked it, glancing quickly. The man decided to add the coat as a bonus along with the insurance adjustment. Impressed, Ark caught the coat in his hands and asked if he could really take it. The man simply said not to worry, there was nothing special about it. Winking at Ark, he added that clothes like this would at least make a novice look more decent. Ark quietly realized the man was right. Until now, he had not paid any attention to his appearance at all, and his clothes were already worn and torn. He looked neither like the adventurer he was trusted to be nor like the mage who was respected. Without hesitation, he quickly threw on the black cloak. The man nodded with satisfaction and said the size fit, though not perfectly, but quite well. After that, he explained that the city was full of adventurers, from complete novices like Ark to seasoned veterans. Therefore, even smaller shops like his could easily survive without problems. Involuntarily, Ark wondered if this man himself was also a drifter and said that he came here personally from a rural area. The man replied that he was. He explained, the city is quite large and stands near several dungeons. Because of this, it has become a favorite base for adventurers, and trading materials from monsters brings insanely profitable income. However, he also warned, the large number of monsters surrounding this area makes the entire country of Crete a dangerous place overall. The man explained, the king looked overly worried because of the increasing number of monsters appearing throughout the country. According to him, the situation became so serious that the kingdom even calls S-rank adventurers from outside the nation. But indeed, from what the man saw, the selection for those S-rank adventurers seemed quite random. While he spoke, he briefly mentioned names like Alan and Balls, then voiced a doubt whether Ark was the same one acting for others. He was checking if Ark's motives were just for money, or if there was something deeper behind his actions. Then the man said that Ark had already earned enough money to live for some time, especially considering how valuable the monster materials were. He threw a heavy bag of coins to Ark, who caught it with one hand. Smiling broadly, the man told Ark, from now on, when he has materials for sale, he should come directly to their shop. Confidently presenting the place as the conscience of Bolton, the man asked Ark to continue supporting the Gale shop. Ark silently thought matters touching on national politics meant almost nothing to him. Leaving the shop, he ran through his next plans in his head. Although he was supposed to meet Gaston later, it was still too early until evening. Quietly, Ark muttered the word status. Immediately before him, a window popped up in midair and he stared at it in surprise. Ark realized how much power he had drawn from the skeleton ogre. His abilities had grown about 4 to 5 times compared to what they were before the battle. Even if it was a rare monster, the increase felt abnormal. With this new status, Ark concluded that now he could explore dungeons alone without much difficulty. Wasting no time, he immediately returned to the item shop and bought everything necessary, after which he headed back toward the dungeon. Before he left the city, the sun had already set. Ark thought that this night would play to his advantage. He could move freely alone and not attract attention, while he was making his way through the forest. Suddenly, a vine lunged at him, or he instantly dodged the strike. It was a plant predator monster of E rank, a creature known for devouring small animals that fit in its jaws. A moment later, another E rank monster appeared, a forest wolf. Beast famous for attacking intruders on its territory, moving swiftly through dense bushes. Ark noticed that the monsters became much more active at night outside the dungeon. However, compared to bears and ogres, these creatures were on a much lower level, but he still decided that it was worth defeating and devouring them, even if the prey was small. With the magic of Ark, he instantly and effortlessly dealt with the monsters. A few seconds later, suddenly a forest wolf appeared behind him. Ark immediately felt its presence and, in one smooth motion, dodged. But to his surprise, the wolf completely ignored him and ran past. Confused, Ark watched as the beast disappeared into the distance. He did not understand why it did not attack at all. It was as if the wolf was afraid of something entirely different. Having realized this, Ark sharply turned toward the direction from which the wolf ran. Suddenly, a deep, resonant sound echoed throughout the entire forest, and he tensed up and immediately prepared himself. Then a young girl jumped out of the trees and, running with all her might, rushed to him. Tears sparkled in her eyes, and she, choking, begged for help as she raced forward. Ark stared at her in surprise, warning that it was dangerous. The girl didn't manage to say a word and simply collapsed into his arms. Upon closer look, Ark immediately noticed animal ears and a tail and recognized her as a beast man at first glance. He was tormented by the question, were all her injuries the result of fleeing through the forest? Consumed by anxiety, Ark asked what had happened. Through tears, the girl painfully told about her village and begged him to help everyone there. Unfortunately, Ark barely understood what she was trying to explain. And suddenly he was struck by a terrible realization. If that wolf was previously running not from the girl herself, then something far more terrible was chasing her. Ark immediately stood up and, protectively pressing the girl against his back, pushed her away. Unconsciously stepped into the dark forest. He activated the spell in his hand and prepared for everything that was about to appear. Although he expected an immediate strike, at first nothing appeared, yet Ark was still sure something dangerous was lurking nearby. Only the girl's fear was proof that he had no right to lower his guard. Suddenly a huge wolf emerged from the darkness. The beast let out a deep growl. The forest echoed and it reached Ark's ears. Without any hesitation, Ark released the prepared spell and, shouting, announced that the creature had finally appeared. In Chapter 7, our actor aimed the spell at the beast hiding in the bushes. His instant deadly magic struck right on target. And yet nothing happened, but Art felt something from inside the darkness. He realized the enemy was acting cautiously. Suddenly a loud scream pierced the area. The silence cracked. Art gasped in surprise. When he realized that there was more than one creature nearby, it became clear. Along with the growl he had heard earlier, they were surrounded by at least 3 enemies. He instantly understood the danger. Ark knew he could not approach the bushes and at the same time protect the girl. Fighting several enemies at once was also incredibly risky. Having no idea what to do, he desperately searched with his eyes for a way out. Then, with a determined look, he decided to use a special ability he had gained after defeating the skeleton ogre. Remembering the battle, Ark activated the skill without any hesitation. Quadruple Death Barrel. This ability, acquired from Forearm Skeleton Ogre, was significantly enhanced. The range and mana cost of his next instant deadly spell increased 4-fold, but activation required charging time. Ark stretched out his hand, and around it gathered a black smoky haze. Despite the fear, he was certain this was his strongest strike and best chance to survive. He clenched his teeth and tried to control the trembling in his hand. At that moment, a wolf jumped out of the bushes. "Let's go," Mark shouted. A giant skull, molded from his hand, surged forward at incredible speed. The wolf watched warily as the spell passed through the bushes. From the depths of the forest suddenly came a painful scream, and Ark understood. The attack worked. With his current stats, heavy mana consumption no longer knocked him down from exhaustion, and that meant he could keep fighting if necessary. The bushes erupted with fierce commotion and the crackle of rustling. He cautiously waited for another enemy to appear, but after some time, he realized the rest of the monsters had fled. With relief, he turned to the wounded girl. "Everything will be fine now," he said softly. Ark handed her a potion and ordered her to drink slowly. The girl quickly emptied the bottle and, exhaling with relief, she suddenly lost consciousness. "Here she is," Art exclaimed in surprise as he caught her. The girl calmly fell asleep in his arms. Art assumed she had simply exhausted all her strength after everything that had happened. Considering how scared she probably was, it was understandable. Ark decided that it was no longer time to continue leveling up. Now his priority was to safely return the girl to Batlin. Yet he still remembered the monster he had already managed to defeat. Quietly, he uttered another spell in his mind, Dead Coffin. Ark looked towards the forest where the beast had been struck. He was sure the spell had to hit. But he could not afford to chase the enemy deeper into the forest while carrying the girl in his arms. Her safety was above all. Before moving on, walking with his back turned, Ark suddenly thought that he had experienced something similar before. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Alan's party was fighting monsters. "Take this," someone shouted. Alan smiled as the attack hit and worked successfully. "That's it, good job, Lin-san," he said. Alan's group easily defeated the monsters surrounding them. After the battle, Alan returned to Lin and asked what level she was now. Lin replied that since the last battle, her level seemed not to have increased. Hearing this, Alan wondered if monsters of that level were no longer enough for her growth. Lin quietly apologized, but Alan immediately said there was no need to apologize. He reminded her that she had already reached level 20 in just 2 days, and that showed how quickly she was progressing. After that, Alan suggested next time they should go even deeper into the dungeon. Fionn asked if they were done for today and said that holding back in battle was exhausting. Dorothea, the party's mage, supported her complaint while the paladin heiress silently stood nearby, not uttering a word. Lin quietly took a step forward and thanked everyone for their help. She promised that from now on she would work even harder. Alan smiled warmly at her and said that everyone at the party were allies who supported each other without hesitation. He explained that she did not need to feel inferior to others. Touched by his words, Lin looked at him with admiration and quietly whispered his name. "Shall we leave then?" Alan announced. The team agreed and returned for the night. Later that same evening, a loud knock suddenly interrupted Alan's rest. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Eris standing there. "Hello, Eris, do you need something?" Alan said indifferently. Eris entered the room and sat on his bed. Before showing him the rolled-up document, she explained. It was another message from the king. He was pressuring them, demanding a report on the search for the keys. Alan gave an embarrassed smile and quietly muttered that they were already doing everything they could. He complained about how impatient the king was behaving. Contrary to rumors spreading throughout the city, the reason why S-rank adventurers like Alan gathered in Cresia was not just to hunt monsters. Their true goal was a special mission from the king who ruled this territory. They were ordered to search the deepest parts of the dungeon, where mysterious keys were said to exist. But Alan himself did not know the true purpose and power of the keys. What affected him was something else. A strange reward was promised for them, a noble title on the land. Even for an S-rank adventurer, gaining influence equal to nobility was almost impossible. That is why the royal offer so alarmed Alan. If the king himself promised such an incredible reward, then the keys must have colossal value, Alan thought quietly. It occurred to him, could he simply take the keys for himself and completely abandon the quest if he ever found them? He wondered if the keys were really so valuable as to silence even the nobility. Alan remained silent as he continued to deeply consider all this. Eris finally broke the silence and asked how long he intended to keep coddling Lin in his caresses. Alan immediately understood she had come precisely for this. He calmly replied that there was no need to rush. Only a few adventure parties were needed anyway, capable of reaching the lower levels of the dungeon. Because of this, he believed there was no reason to hurry. Alan assured Eris Lin's talent was genuine. So far, Alan's party had never needed a healer with restorative magic. Moreover, their incredible combat power always made such support unnecessary. But the dungeon where the keys were hidden was nothing like what they had encountered before. The area was swarming with hordes of giant monsters. The deeper they advanced into the dungeon, the more monsters continuously emerged from the darkness. It was nothing like any dungeon Alan and his companions had faced in their many years of travel. They even felt as if the dungeon itself was resisting their invasion. Alan realized his party members were not lacking in strength. The problem lay elsewhere, in the very nature of the dungeon. Due to the incredible number of monsters constantly appearing, their restorative resources were continuously depleted. It was then that Alan came across Lin. A healer who could properly support a squad as strong as his was extremely rare. At that time, Alan and his companions were already stalling near the guild, almost resigned to the thought that they would find no suitable candidate. Pure chance led them to Lin, a talented girl with a high-level cap and 3 skills in the priest style. To Alan, this seemed like a true miracle. Yet Ares was still uneasy. She noted that if they lingered waiting for Lin to become stronger, Baltzart's party might get ahead and take the keys first. Among all the adventurers gathered nearby, only Baltzart's squad did Alan consider truly exceptional. Alan calmly admitted that Baltzart's party was probably equal to theirs in strength. That was why. Eris burst out in despair. Again like this, despite her anxiety, Alan simply smiled and assured her that everything would be fine. He explained that Baltzart's party also lacked healers. Furthermore, Alan doubted that travelers from an unfamiliar region would willingly cooperate with someone as notoriously infamous as Baltzart. Eris fell silent as soon as she heard his arguments. Alan reminded her that the king's request involved finding 3 keys in total. Even if Baltzart's group managed to get one of them first, it would not be a big problem. Hearing this, Ares quietly grumbled her agreement. Her eyes flashed with determination. As she declared, as long as their party eventually obtained all the keys, everything would work out. After that, she said she would continue to follow their leader's decisions. Alan asked if there was any new information about other dungeons. Eris replied that there was nothing significant at the moment. She explained that Alan's party took responsibility for Northern Dungeon while the Baltzart group moved westward. Meanwhile, Eastern Dungeon, known as the Labyrinth of Verdant Greenery, remained untouched. Relying on guild records, Eris explained that travelers from Boltana are only capable of handling the middle floors of the dungeons, no more. Hearing this, Alan smiled knowingly. Since no one would reach the deepest levels of the eastern and western dungeons anytime soon, he thought there was no point in rushing. So Alan decided, let them continue to act unhurriedly and move cautiously. The heirs quietly agreed, at least for now. In Chapter 8, a frightened girl was rushing full speed through the forest, gasping for air. Fear was reflected in her eyes as she screamed for help and constantly looked back over her shoulder. The beast was already chasing her and rapidly closing the distance. When the monster was about to grab her, suddenly a man appeared. In a moment, the beast vanished without a trace. The girl looked at him with relief. Before she completely lost consciousness, when the girl opened her eyes again, she saw that she was in a shop. The owner greeted her and asked if she had regained consciousness. Frightened, the girl sat up abruptly and asked where she was. The owner explained she was in Boltana in Gale's shop and she had been brought here the previous night. He pointed towards Ark and told her that he was the one who brought her there after finding her torn apart by monsters. Ark reminded her that before she fainted, he gave her a potion to drink. Then he asked if she was okay. Girl's eyes widened sharply in surprise, as did Th. As soon as she realized that this was the same man from her dream whom she had seen before, she immediately shouted that she was fine and thanked him for saving her in such a dangerous situation. She introduced herself Fatina. Then Ark introduced himself in return. Fatina quietly repeated his name, calling him Ark-sama before the moment could continue. The shop owner interrupted him and said he had heard a little about that monster since last night. Then he quietly and cautiously asked if she was ready to tell what exactly happened. Catching her breath and falling silent for a moment, Fatina explained that she came from a village located south of the dungeon. From time to time, monsters appeared around, but the village soldiers and the mage always dealt with them. That monster from last night was completely different. According to her, no one had the strength to stop that huge black creature. Ark asked what the monster looked like and if there was more than one. Confused, Fatina repeated his question, then explained that there was supposed to be only one monster. Since it was dark, she could not clearly see its appearance. Hearing this, Ark remembered that terrifying roar he had heard earlier. Fatina added that magic had never worked on the creature. She explained, every spell seemed to disappear before it even reached it. The shop owner replied that the likely reason was magical protection, an ability possessed by some powerful monsters. He explained that it works like a wall around the monsters, but so magical attacks bounce off and scatter without causing harm. Ark silently pondered the mention of stronger monsters. Fatina continued the story and said that as soon as everyone realized that neither swords nor magic worked, the villagers scattered in fear. Unfortunately, the monster decided to chase Haran. That was when Ark saved her life. The shop owner nodded and said that if the villagers scattered, some could have escaped by fleeing to nearby villages or hiding in Boltana. Hearing this, Fatina suddenly jumped out of bed and exclaimed that she needed to find the others immediately. But as soon as she stood up, her legs gave way. Before she fell, Nasinya quickly caught her. Calmly, he told her that she still had not fully recovered, so now she needed not to strain herself. Confused, Fatina blushed and thanked him again, although she insisted that she was fine and needed to leave immediately. Shop owner asked Fatina to calm down and wait a moment. He explained that even if she wanted to find her friends, she could not go outside looking like she did now. At least he wanted her to change into the clothes he had prepared and eat first. But Fatina quickly interrupted him. He could not ask him to do so much for her. Hearing this, the shop owner changed his tone and told her he would put it differently. Angrily, he asked if she understood what trouble it would cause if people saw a girl dressed like that coming out of his shop. As if staging a theatrical pause, he declared, for him, this was a matter of life and death. Then the shop owner called Arka and ordered him to come have breakfast together with him. A little later, the three sat next to each other and ate. Shop owner sighed heavily and muttered weakly. Art silently looked at him so intently that the owner couldn't stand it and asked what he was looking at. Fatina, Ark, and Gale set off for the village of Fatina. When they arrived, the village was in a terrible state. Tired soldiers rested nearby and the cries of the villagers echoed around. Others were bustling dressing the wounded. Someone said the village had suffered serious damage. Gale added that even before the recent surge of monster attacks, they were already short of soldiers. Fatina looked anxiously around the village, trying with all her might to find familiar faces. The commander stood before the troops and ordered them to disperse and sweep the surrounding villages. He commanded to check the evacuees and assess what had happened in other areas. The commander also handed over a letter that needed to be delivered to Third Port and allowed the use of a fast horse if necessary. The soldiers immediately responded in unison. Then the commander announced that he would deal with matters with the guild and the rest would handle the situation in the village. Again, the troops loudly confirmed his orders. At that moment, two women noticed Fatina. He sharply inhaled FFFFF. Before rushing to them and calling her aunt, he paused for a moment. The aunt looked relieved and asked if Fatina was really safe. Ark and Gale silently watched the touching reunion. Fatina's aunt explained that they still did not know if every villager had survived, but fortunately, those who managed to escape were not seriously injured thanks to the soldiers' help. Hearing this, Fatina sighed with relief and said she was glad they found them safe. Meanwhile, Arkitely was leaving. In his mind, he was already figuring out what he needed to do next. Gale quickly noticed this and asked where he was heading. Ark calmly replied that he was going after that monster. Stunned by surprise, Gale burst out shouting that Ark was spouting some nonsense again. Fatina looked at them confused and, as Ark explained, everyone already felt the shortage of people anyway. He emphasized, under the current circumstances, no one can say how long the monster will wander, remaining unsupervised. Because of this, he believed he had the right to deal with him himself. Gale could only wonder where Ark got such confidence. Deep down, Ark honestly admitted one of the reasons was that he wanted to defeat the mighty monster and absorb its power. But he also understood, if the guard in this area completely fell, it would only get worse for everyone. Suddenly, Fatina loudly called them together and ordered them to wait. She declared that if Ark really intended to go after the monster, she wanted to join him. Her aunt froze in shock and Ark silently stared at her. Fatina firmly said that she wants to help in any way. Even when her aunt tried to stop her, Fatina stepped forward and begged Arka to listen to her. She explained that her parents died of illness when she was very young and then the peasants raised and cared for her. Now she wanted to repay them and protect them, so she would do everything in her power to save them. Fatina bowed low and begged Ark to allow her to fight alongside him. Ark sighed heavily, trying to respond. Gale cut him off, not letting him finish speaking. Gale told Fatina that he respects her determination, but if she really wants to fight alongside Ark, she first needs the strength of an adventurer. After that, Gale suggested, first head to the guild for a skill assessment. He explained if Fatina really had the power to fight, that would be one thing, but if she did not have such an ability, she would have to refuse to participate in the fight. He asked her what she thought about this idea. Fatina immediately agreed, saying he was right and she understood everything. Satisfied with her answer, Gale loudly declared that the matter was settled. Then he grabbed Ark by the shoulder and told him to just follow the plan. Ark broke away with a confused breath, but Gale did not stop. He said there was plenty of work anyway, and he had already helped Ark so much. According to him, that should be more than enough. Fatina looked at Ark with delight and waited for his answer with impatience. Sighing, Ark finally agreed. Before they left, Gale ordered them to return to the shop as soon as they finished. Fatina thanked him joyfully, then excitedly called Ark to hurry along with her. Meanwhile, her aunt quietly muttered to herself, not believing Fatina's behavior. As soon as they reached the guild, Fatina noticed that Ark had put on a hood and asked why he was hiding like that. Ark hesitated and awkwardly tried to change the subject. He waved his hand toward the counter and told her to register there as an adventurer. He explained that new adventurers are given a free skill assessment. After some time, a guild worker named Emmy suddenly shuddered in shock. Not believing her own eyes, she whispered that this could not be and that the results could not be correct. The woman nearby also reacted with surprise. Seeing their reaction, Fatina nervously asked if her abilities were bad. Emmy immediately exclaimed that it was exactly the opposite. She excitedly explained that in Fatina the level limit is 100. Fatina innocently asked if that really impresses. Emmy enthusiastically replied that it is much, much more than impressive. She added that the guild has never seen anyone with a level limit of 100. The woman next to her added even more shocking news. Fatina possessed not one or two, but 4 different skills. All the surrounding travelers immediately exploded with shock and delight. The assessment showed 4 abilities of Fatina. The first, swordsmanship, an extraordinary talent in sword mastery, considered the highest class of swordsmanship. The second, supplemental growth, greatly enhanced the increase of her attributes each time she leveled up. The third, magic breaker, provided strong resistance to magic and similar forces. Finally, she had holy magic. It allowed the use of healing and other sacred abilities. Having heard all this, Ark silently concluded, Fatina had a flawless build for a frontline fighter, and Fatina herself was delighted she really knew how to fight. And just as the evaluation ended, a multitude of adventurers rushed at her like an avalanche in a desperate attempt to lure her to their team. Fortunately, Ark had already anticipated such a reaction. Before the crowd could fully surround her, he quickly grabbed Fatina and quit the guild together with her. Finally breaking free, Fatina was gasping from exhaustion and admitted that what had happened was shocking. She sincerely thanked Ark for helping her escape. Ark only replied briefly. After that, Fatina happily added that she had no idea how passionate adventurers become when recruiting members into their company. She acknowledged that she still had a lot to learn. Meanwhile, Ark quietly thought that he acted with good intentions, considering Fatina's incredible talent. He believed that she might be better off joining a normal and experienced company. The situation suddenly reminded him of something from the past. Before he could continue the thought, Fatina suddenly called him. Asked if he had his own company. Ark fell silent for a moment. Before finally revealing the truth, he explained, his level limit is only level 1 and the only skill is instant death magic. Not reacting negatively, Fatina cheerfully asked if that meant he was fighting alone. Then she eagerly wondered if her abilities would come in handy if they fought together, completely baffled by his reaction. Arch silently stared at her, not understanding. Deep down, he still expected that after the words about his limitations, she would react differently. But Fatina simply smiled and explained. Although many adventurers had tried to lure her away before, if she ever formed a party, she would only want to take Ark with her. She said she made this decision the moment she asked to accompany him. Ark asked Fatina why she was willing to go so far for him. Lost in his own thoughts, he admitted he never expected such an answer from her. Fatina explained that earlier that very morning, Gale told her everything that happened after he saved her in the forest. She learned that Ark carried her on his back all night while looking for a safe place for her to rest. And in the end, he even went into Gale's shop and personally asked for help for her. Because of everything he did, Fatina said she now believes that Ark is someone she can trust more than anyone else, and it happened just like that. So why exactly would she want to fight alongside him if she had to go into battle with anyone? While he listened to her words, Ark quietly fell silent. Then Fatina nervously asked if her reason was not enough. Ark shook his head and replied that he understood. After that, he barely whispered to himself. Her answer was much greater than he could ever have hoped for. Gathering his thoughts, Ark asked Fatina if she would form a team with him. He declared that together they would defeat the monster. Fatina immediately agreed, glowing with excitement, and they shook hands. She joyfully said yes, and Ark replied that from now on he could rely on her. Then the two returned to Gale's shop and told him everything in detail. Gale listened with an expression that clearly showed he had been waiting all along for everything to go this way. This annoyed Ark a little. Gale commented that a level limit of 1 combined with a level limit of 100 definitely creates an unusual combination. Still, he admitted, such an unlikely duo sounds interesting. Ark then asked if Gale was worried after hearing about his supposedly useless abilities. Gale loudly cut in. He was definitely shocked to learn that Ark was rumored to be the weakest adventurer. But he also heard from the guild the story about how Ark defeated the skeleton ogre yesterday in Brawl 8. Because of this, Gale decided Ark is probably actually incredibly strong. Surprised, Ark asked what Gale meant. Gale just chuckled and said that now Ark had become curious. Then he opened a box and explained, since they were going to the dungeon to level up, Fatina needed proper equipment. He showed that he had already gathered gear suitable for a frontline fencer, along with everything necessary. Fatina froze with delight examining the equipment, but quickly admitted that she had no money to pay for it. Gale casually replied that Ark had already given her more than enough for expenses, so there was no need to worry. Excited, Fatina turned to Ark and asked if it was really true. Meanwhile, Ark silently looked at Gale as if trying to understand how much the old shopkeeper had already taken from them. Gale further explained, since Fatina would probably fight on the upper floors of the dungeon, ordinary armor would suffice at least for now. But the real problem was her weapon. She said that Fatina's sword master skill would put incredible strain on ordinary blades, so that was why he prepared something special for her. These words, Gale handed Fatina a silver sword. Gale explained that silver has properties against magic, so the weapon is especially effective against the undead, and he proudly declared that this was the best sword he currently had in stock. Fatina looked at the silver sword and froze with delight, exclaiming that such a valuable item was incredible. She promised to take very, very good care of it. Immediately after this, Gale abruptly pulled Ark to himself and handed him a short sword in the same way. He explained, although Ark is a mage without combat skills, this weapon can still come in handy at close range if the situation suddenly becomes dangerous. Ark accepted the sword and silently wondered if Gale was not too openly leaning towards Fatina. When everything was prepared, Gale led them outside to see them off on their journey. Fatina sincerely thanked him for all the help. In response, Gale reminded them to be careful and watch out for each other during the fight to avoid getting hurt. Ark casually replied that everything was already insured anyway. While they were heading to the dungeon, Ark told Fatini about his own abilities and everything he knew about how travelers gain levels and experience. During the conversation, Ark suddenly raised another topic. Now that they were already party members, he asked if Fatina could stop calling him Ark-sama. But still, Fatina immediately refused. She loudly declared that these two matters are completely different. In her eyes, joining the party changes nothing. Ark saved her life. Awkwardly, Ark asked if she really had to continue using that form of address. Fatina firmly replied that yes, definitely. Hearing her stubborn answer, Ark simply resigned himself and said he understood. Eventually, they reached the eastern dungeon. Ark explained, from now on they would have to fight monsters on the upper floors. Since only the one who delivers the final blow gains experience, Fatini would have to go into battle first and he would support her from behind. He assured her that as long as the enemies were still at D-rank level, he could help without any problems, so she did not need to worry. Fatina enthusiastically replied that she would rely on him, and he silently, alone with himself, quietly nervously. Since he had never personally gone through the usual leveling system and had not fought with ordinary skills, he did not know how smoothly everything would go. Suddenly, a loud rumble thundered through the territory. Both Ark and Fatina immediately turned toward the sound coming from there. In a moment, the man rushed to them running and frantically begged someone to save him. Behind him, dispelling fear, several goblins along with a large orc were rushing. The orc looked threateningly at Ark and Fatina's face twitched nervously. The man in despair fled from monsters. Panic was written on his face as he ran for his life. Watching the scene unfold, Ark froze in shock. Monsters from the dungeons suddenly appeared beyond his usual territory. His mind was confused and he couldn't understand what was happening. But he didn't have time to think further. Fatina's voice sharply brought him back to reality. The man who was fleeing stumbled and fell to the ground, and several goblins slowly approached him. Weapons were raised and ready to strike. Feeling the threat, Fatina immediately understood. They needed to help him. Ark agreed, but in his thoughts noted this would be their first real clash. Without any hesitation, Fatina rushed forward. In one swift move, with a single strike, she cut down a goblin and it fell dead immediately. Ark froze in shock. Despite her previous words that she had never even held a sword properly, she moved flawlessly with perfect precision. Goblin after goblin fell under her blade, quick, clean strikes, one after another. Ark barely believed in the power of the swordmaster's skill while Fatina was fighting. She herself was amazed. She could naturally read the movements of her enemies and instinctively understood how to swing the sword, gripping it even tighter. She understood this was her strength, the strength with which she could protect others. Suddenly, a huge beast appeared behind her back. Ark immediately shouted a warning. In the next moment, the orc's hand flew into the air, and Fatina with incredible speed ran the blade through his body cleanly and without resistance. The orc fell. She helplessly fell to the ground, and Ark froze in amazement at how quickly it happened. The rescued man could only barely stammer in disbelief as he tried to take a full breath. Then, without any warning, a hand placed a bottle on his head. The frightened man jerked sharply and sprang to his feet. Turning to Ark, Ark calmly asked what had happened. The man cried out in despair that he wanted to know the same. According to him, the monsters suddenly jumped out of the dungeon walls without any warning. But as soon as he spoke, he suddenly realized who Ark was. Trembling, he froze, recalling what had happened earlier in the guild. Ark ordered him to forget that incident and instead asked where his comrades were. The man quickly explained, the others are still below, they are trapped and under attack. She reached the brink of despair. He fell to his knees and begged Ark and Fatina to save them. Without wasting a second, Ark and Fatina rushed deeper into the dungeon. When they reached the lower floor, they stopped and looked down. Below, a group of travelers was fiercely squeezed by wild beasts. The air was full of fear and panic, and the trapped men desperately fought off the monsters. One of them roared for them to retreat, while another cursed in frantic terror, unable to comprehend what was happening. Suddenly, an orc growled and charged straight at the prey. Before it could strike, Arch's boot flew straight into the face. The attack was instantly broken, and the beast twitched and jumped back. The adventurers froze in shock, not expecting such interference. At that very moment, Fatina rushed into battle alongside Ark, leaping straight into the thick of it. She cleaved the orc's body with a single strike. Ark called Heron. They together rushed through the remaining monsters, blocking their way. Fatina effortlessly defeated even the skeletal monster in a single stroke. Watching her fight, Ark realized she seemed to have grown stronger after the previous clashes. Even against the weakened enemy, her power was completely devastating. The additional growth skill confirmed its incredibility. The sounds of their attacks echoed throughout the dungeon as the travelers froze in amazement. Amidst it all, one thought stood out clearly in their minds. Fatina is incredibly strong, while another traveler silently wondered who Fatina really was. She stood calmly among the corpses of fallen beasts. Slightly exhaling, Fatina remained near Archva. While the rescued men hesitate, still unable to believe they had truly been saved, concerned Fatina quickly asked if everyone was all right. In a few moments, the tension in the air slowly began to subside. One of the men admitted Ark and Fatina really saved their lives. Another apologized for his previous behavior, and the third awkwardly thanked them. Admitting that their actions were wrong, Art put everything on hold and waved it off. He said he no longer cared about what happened before. Instead, he touched on another, more important matter and demanded to know where all the monsters came from. It was strange, not only because the monsters appeared on the upper floors, even the entrance to the dungeon had already been captured. One of the men repeated again what he had already said before. The monsters suddenly jumped out right from the walls themselves, and even now he could barely believe it. Another traveler, pale with fear, explained there was absolutely nothing there, and in an instant the monsters suddenly surrounded them. There were no footsteps, no breathing, no warning at all. Fatina asked if such events were common inside dungeons. The experienced traveler immediately objected. He had never heard of anything like that. Their group had visited the dungeon more than once, but nothing even close to this had ever happened. While Ark was listening, unease settled in his mind. Between that mysterious appearance of monsters and what had happened before with the skeletal ogre, it became clear something terrible was happening. Suddenly, Fatina's ears twitched sharply. Her face froze as she listened to a distant sound. Ark immediately noticed the change and asked what she heard. Fatina replied she caught footsteps and screams coming from deeper inside the dungeon. One of the men gasped in surprise, while another whispered that he heard nothing at all. Fatina calmly explained, the beast Ken has much sharper hearing than humans. In a moment, she warned everyone that something was approaching. In the distance, a group of travelers suddenly appeared. They were running at full speed, and fear was evident on their faces. Behind them loomed a giant figure. One of the men had already started shouting an alarm at the very moment the huge creature fully emerged from the shadows. It was an ogre. Panic instantly overwhelmed the adventurers as they started shouting. They fled, saving their lives. Seeing the chaos unfold, Ark realized he needed to get the others to safety before the situation got worse. Ark shouted to the adventurers to focus on evacuating the people, and he himself, along with Fatina, took on the ogre. Without hesitation, Fatina responded and rushed forward alongside him. The prophetic giant man-eater swung his huge fist directly at them. Ark barely managed to dodge the crushing blow. Suddenly realized this was not a lifeless creation like that ogre skeleton from last time. This ogre had living flesh and blood, and despite his gigantic body, he moved with terrifying speed. Fatina quickly went around the monster from behind, but the ogre immediately noticed her movement, sharply shifted his gaze to her, slightly surprised by her attentiveness. She reacted the same way as the beast that hurled a huge stone in her direction. Fatina elegantly dodged the shell, her movements quick and timed to the second. The adult travelers could only nervously watch as the fierce battle unfolded right before them. Ark quickly assessed the situation. Even weakened, the ogre still remained at least a C-rank level threat, and without obstacles limiting its movement, it became even more dangerous. Yet, having seen Fatina's previous fights and the rapid growth her abilities provided, he was sure she would cope with the monster if given the right chance. Calling her, Ark declared he would be the bait. Instantly, he cast a spell and hurled it at the ogre. The monster calmly deflected the attack to the side with a single wave of its palm, but this moment of distraction opened the passage they needed. Fatina rushed forward with incredible speed. Closing in for a moment, she snatched the blade and slashed the giant's leg. The beast roared in pain, clutching its wounded limb. In a moment, Fatina leapt high into the air. Her sword flashed brightly as she struck directly into the ogre's maw. Watching her movements, Art could not help but admire the incredible power of high-level skills. Fatina's blade deeply cut into the ogre's maw. After this, she quickly jumped off his body and landed back on the ground intact. The traveler's whole bodies seemed frozen, their eyes widened in disbelief, and when the giant ogre's body heavily crashed into the dungeon floor, the cave echoed with a rumble, and silence covered everyone nearby. Watching Fatina stand victorious, Ark realized Although she had become an adventurer only recently, she already possessed the strength of a first-class fighter. Fatina gracefully landed on the ground. While the stunned travelers continued to look at her in amazement, whispers about her soon began to spread. Among them, for a moment, Art even paused in thought what it would be like to possess such a powerful skill oneself. But Fatina's voice quickly pulled him out of his thoughts when she asked if everyone was okay. Ark silently dismissed his own thoughts, understanding that thoughts about what he lacked would change nothing. Later, they all together got out of the dungeon. Ark noticed. Fortunately, no one looked as if they had suffered serious injuries. Still, he ordered them to stick together and carefully return to the city in case any more monsters appeared. Then Fatina asked what they themselves should do. Ark replied that they too would head back for now, explaining, under the current circumstances, going deeper into the dungeon was too dangerous. Suddenly, something occurred to Ark and he stopped abruptly. Fatina immediately noticed and asked what had happened. Ark grumbled about the monsters Fatina had defeated earlier and asked if there had really been so few of them. Fatina admitted that she got too caught up in the fight and couldn't properly keep track of the score, but she apologized. Art quickly made her understand that it wasn't her fault. But still, the anxiety settled in his head. Since the monsters were not killed by instant deadly magic, the skill Dead Coffin should not have worked. This whole situation did not make sense to him. Wondering what exactly was happening inside the dungeon, Ark clenched everyone and ordered them to retreat. When they set off, the bodies of the broken orcs slowly dissipated. In half a day, the guild plunged into chaos. Buried under alarming reports, Emmy stared in despair at the question, what happened? Adventurers loudly reported that orcs suddenly jumped out from the dungeon walls without any warning. Others added that giant ogres and even skeletal monsters appeared on the upper floors. Rumors quickly spread. The Boltana dungeon, they said, might no longer be safe, and some adventurers were already thinking of leaving the city altogether. An especially angry adventurer accused the guild of hiding information and demanded answers. Watching the commotion flare up, Fatina quietly noted that everything was getting out of control. Art silently agreed with her. He suspected that at least some of the adventurers or guild members knew more than they were willing to admit. Too many strange incidents happened simultaneously. Powerful monsters appeared where they shouldn't be, mysterious black creatures appeared, and now monsters materialized right from the dungeon walls. Art began to wonder if this was the root of all these anomalies. Somewhere it was tied to the dungeon itself. Breaking the silence, Art called out to Fatina. She immediately responded respectfully. Ark explained, fighting visible enemies is one thing, but in understanding the deep secrets of dungeons, both of them are still amateurs. Meanwhile, in his opinion, it is better to focus their attention on the mysterious black monster. He also said that the older women traveling with them can safely stay at the back. Fatina stared at him with a look full of new determination. A spark burned in her eyes and she agreed with his reasoning. She said she still needed to become even stronger. Seeing her fighting spirit somewhat restored, Art quietly felt relief. Meanwhile, on the eastern watchtower overlooking Boltana, several guards were discussing the escalating riots. One said he heard the guild was in panic over the eastern dungeon, while another, seemingly casually, asked if the monsters had started breeding again. And how is it that the adventurers are still in trouble, although reinforcements recently sharply increased the ranks? The first guard noted, the dungeon has existed for centuries and has never before caused such disturbances. He added that, according to rumors, many of the newer adventurers simply did not hold the situation while the conversation lasted. One of the guards silently peered into the distance through the scope. When he did not respond, the second guard shouted at him irritably but suddenly fell silent halfway through. Noticing the man, he was trembling with fear. Confused, the guard asked what had happened. "In pure horror," a trembling man whispered through his teeth, not believing his own eyes, while staring into the distance and trying to understand what exactly was in front of him. In Chapter 10, everyone gathered in front of the Adventurers Guild while the branch manager Boltana spoke with the anxious crowd. He explained that monster activity in the dungeons and around them was increasing, and the government was already struggling due to a shortage of personnel. After the attacks that happened the day before and the freshest incident inside the dungeon, the authorities decided to act immediately. The government turned to the guild for help and tried to recruit mercenaries among travelers to cope with the growing threat. Gaston replayed the announcement in his head once more, considering how sharp the government's decision was to rely on adventurers as mercenaries. From a management perspective, it was a risky move. Adventurers are known to be difficult to keep disciplined, but a quick response would at least calm the residents. While the guild clerks handed out papers with requirements, the adventurers reviewed them with various, conflicting reactions. Some were tempted by the generous pay, while others reasoned that such high compensation could mean only one thing: the job was incredibly dangerous. After talks about recent incidents, many hesitated and were reluctant to participate. Doug openly grumbled that the whole situation smelled like a troublesome mess and insisted there was no chance he would join. Even after a few moments passed, during the anxious silence no adventurer stepped forward, and Gaston shifted his gaze to Ark. And with surprise noticed that he never expected Ark to gather and form a party. Fatina cheerfully introduced herself and asked everyone to take care of her as well. Gaston narrowed his eyes slightly, almost unable to cope with her bright personality. Before touching Ark's shoulders and saying how sincerely happy he was for him, Doug noticeably stopped. Ark, confused by Gaston's strange expression, asked what happened. Doug immediately teased them, stating that it was quite natural for Ark to choose a team with a girl rather than pair up with an older man like Gaston. Gaston loudly objected to the insult. While Ark waved off the objections and explained that he and Fatina intended to accept the mission, he asked others to share any important information they learned. Gaston agreed without hesitation. Thanks to Ark and Fatina, they already understood how dangerous the dungeon had become. Monsters began breaking through walls, and events like the appearance of a skeleton ogre continued to flare up without any explanation, throwing everyone into complete confusion. Doug suddenly suggested that maybe they should just run away somewhere else, but the others looked at him as if branding him a coward. He quickly assured them that he was joking. At that moment the air sharply changed, a ringing sharp, piercing jet across the territory. Confusion began in the crowd, but one woman immediately realized the sound was coming from the eastern part of the city. The secretary hurriedly reported to the branch chief, who immediately ordered everyone to remain calm. He explained that the bell was an alarm signal from the gates, and the color of the signal indicated that the city should prepare for the highest danger. Soon the guard broke through the crowd, shouting wildly for people to step aside. Reaching the front, he announced the terrible news. A massive horde of monsters was advancing on the city. Among the gathered and sour and ordinary civilians, pushes rippled through the crowd like a shock wave. The guard, choking with fear, explained the swarm was incredibly large. A whisper quickly spread through the crowd. Some tried to understand what was happening. Others wondered if the prison itself had overflowed. Falling to his knees in horror, he kept correcting himself again and again. These were not just hundreds of monsters, but hundreds of hundreds, and they were coming here. At that moment, it struck everyone standing nearby. The head of the department quickly composed himself and ordered all travelers to drop formalities and unite to protect the city, yet hesitation still lingered among the travelers as the threat had just become real to them. Quietly replaying in his mind whether monster activity had really increased since that very morning, Ark silently mirrored the doubts. Meanwhile, Doug trembled with panic, insisting that the city's people had no chance against hundreds of monsters. Ezuri anxiously asked what they should do before the onslaught as the panic grew. Gaston suddenly stepped forward and declared that there was still something they could do. Ark looked at him with surprise. As Gaston said, everyone calm down and listen carefully. Gaston explained that there is a well-known way to deal with such monster hordes. When the swarm consisted of different species, there was usually a commander who led the others. If that leader were killed, the rest of the monsters would lose coordination and scatter. One experienced traveler compared the strategy to cutting off a snake's head, while another wondered how they were supposed to find the commander among hundreds of monsters. Gaston clarified the commander was usually the strongest monster in the pack. The department head immediately confirmed his words and stated that the best option was to find and destroy the commander. While the travelers tried to keep the pack under control, they had to find the leader as quickly as possible. There was no time to waste. The travelers began discussing possible strategies and preparing for the upcoming battle. In the commotion, Fatina noticed Ark quietly stepping away and asked where he was going. Ark calmly replied that he wanted to defeat the commander on his own, and if Gaston and Hildia's words were true, his removal would resolve the crisis, causing Gaston's eyes to flash with shock when Ark said this. Those nearby travelers who heard him began to whisper and wonder if he had lost his mind. Despite their reaction, Ark said that time was running out and ordered Fatini to stay somewhere behind, safe, along with the others. But as soon as Ark left, he himself said that he had lost his mind, Fatina immediately rushed after him, shouting for him to wait. Doug and the others watched, holding their breath as these two headed to the battlefield. When the frightened townspeople were panic-stricken, fleeing in terror from the eastern gate where monsters were approaching, Ark rushed straight towards the danger. In his thoughts, he noted that the eastern gate stood right at the end of the main street. and just then he heard someone calling him. Turning around, he saw that Fatina was catching up with him. Ark immediately ordered her to turn back, but Fatina firmly refused. He warned her that it was a swarm of hundreds of monsters and explained, unlike him, she would not be able to fight forever without exhausting herself. Fatina admitted that he was probably right, but stated she would never abandon an ally if he himself was risking danger. Being a member of his party, she could not just stand aside and leave him behind. Fatina refused to return. Although Ark told her not to follow him, she insisted she would go with him anyway. Realizing that she could not be persuaded otherwise, Ark finally waved his hand and let her do whatever she wanted. Fatina confidently declared that she would do it. Meanwhile, in the Adventurers Guild where everyone had gathered, anxious whispers filled the hall. Some could not believe that these two were really rushing straight towards the monsters. Some accused Arka only of looking for an excuse to run away, and a few people nervously wondered what to do next. The receptionist caught the commotion and announced to everyone, the man cloaked in a closed cloak is the very traveler whose skill assessment received a limited level. A shock erupted in the branch hall. Some maliciously claimed that he finally ran away, while others mocked him, calling him the weakest scum. The department chief quickly intervened and reminded everyone that now is not the time for such disputes. When Gaston heard the slander, he felt bitter at the thought that the crowd would say anything. But he immediately understood, he should have guessed earlier. Instant death from Ara's magic was already proof that he was the very traveler everyone was talking about. Gaston stepped forward and ordered everyone to listen. He told them whether they believe it or not, but a man named Ark is stronger than anyone present here now. Ark was not one to run away. As before, he just broke loose and rushed forward alone. Gaston continued and revealed, the skeletal cannibal he had previously reported to the guild had actually already been defeated by Ark in his heart. Gaston was certain. Ark was more sincere and diligent than anyone. The man in the crowd snorted defiantly and dismissed the story as nonsense, but the woman shouted that it was true. Doug asked Gaston what he meant, but Gaston ignored him and continued addressing the crowd. He explained that they only needed to hold back the swarm and buy time for Arka and Fatina. But the crowd reacted negatively. Someone shouted that they would never defeat so many monsters. Gaston insisted, if everyone worked together and focused on defense, they could at least hold back the monsters. Meanwhile, the receptionist quietly informed the department head that Ark was also the adventurer who brought the killer bear. But despite everything, the crowd continued to protest loudly. Some insisted that such statements were simply unbelievable. Others demanded to know who would be responsible if everything failed. Someone advised fleeing west, and someone declared that if anyone wanted to fight, let them go alone. Having listened to all his complaints and fears swirling around like a swarm, Gaston hated it in his thoughts and could not understand what he could do at all. Suddenly, a person appeared and declared, if they are already talking about this matter, then she also knows the truth about it. Meanwhile, near the eastern gate, the guards began preparing for the approaching horde of monsters. The commander ordered all able-bodied to assemble and immediately set up barricades using whatever was at hand, while the non-combatants were ordered to evacuate westward due to insufficient personnel to escort them. And suddenly the commander faltered. Noticing two people running to the gates, he shouted at them, demanded an explanation of what they were doing, and urged them to reach the shelter as quickly as possible. However, before he could finish speaking, Ark and Fatina made a dash and flew past him headlong without slowing down. Two quickly slipped through the gate. One of the guards froze in shock and shouted to the commander who they were. Then he announced that he was lowering the drawbridge. Meanwhile, Ark and Fatina kept running forward as soon as they covered a certain distance. Ark suddenly stopped and waved to Fatina to stop as well. He said that before meeting the monsters, they needed to organize their thoughts. Fatina nodded and agreed. Their main intention was to destroy the monster acting as the commander, but she also wanted to minimize the pressure on the city as much as possible. Ark replied. He did not need to defeat every monster, it was enough to stop as many as possible. While he was thinking to himself, Ark realized, most likely he would not be able to release his death magic fast enough. Therefore, he decided that he had to rely on ordinary weapons as well. Then Ark told Fatina that although it was a difficult request, she needed to remember the recovery effect that triggers every time she levels up. Fatina replied that she understood. As the two of them walked toward the swarm, Ark suddenly called her again. Fatina pushed him to keep going without stopping. He was quietly thanked, and hearing those words, Fatina smiled warmly. Getting close to the monsters, Ark and Fatina rushed forward and began the attack. In Chapter 11, Fatina and Ark rushed toward the attacking swarm of monsters. As they closed the distance, the formation of monsters began to break apart. Several monsters were destroyed immediately, but many still remained. The two were quickly surrounded. Arch swung his sword and with one strike knocked down two monsters. When the ogre charged at him at full speed, he used his instant death skill. The creature's body collapsed on the spot, but in a moment, another pack of monsters surrounded it again. Arch realized he wouldn't have time to fire the skill in a series and decided to save his death magic for stronger enemies. Fearing for Fatina, Arch looked toward where she was fighting. She was also surrounded by a bunch of monsters, but moved quickly and precisely cutting them down one by one. Seeing this, Arch realized it seems she is fine as is. Fatina turned to the monster ahead and cut horizontally, cleanly splitting the ogre in half. She slipped past the falling body and immediately defeated another monster that was trying to trap her in a ring. Meanwhile, on Arch's side before him raged an explosive flash. Two ogres at once charged the attack, hurling smaller monsters into the air as they made their way forward. Arch anxiously thought that now he was left alone and wondered if he could endure this situation. There was no time to doubt himself while the ogres were closing in. Arch jumped over one of the giant ogres, deciding that it was nothing compared to his fight with the skeleton earlier, and loudly roared. He lunged at the ogre's face, grabbed its horn, and activated his death skill. The monster instantly collapsed. Without stopping, Arch rushed at the second huge man-eater. Just as she raised her hand to strike, a massive hand slapped her face. The beast staggered and turned back to Arch again. Arch then activated his dead coffin skill, summoning the giant ogre he had just defeated, mockingly telling the rest of the ogres that he could bring back their comrade. Before throwing the body on him, a huge carcass hit the last ogre. She simultaneously brought everything down to the ground. Fatina, who witnessed it, said it was impressive. Arch was gasping for breath and had no idea how effective the strike had been. His thoughts were cut off when he saw that the goblins were still holding their position. His eyes widened in shock. Even after witnessing the fall of two mighty ogres, the goblins did not flinch, and then it became clear. Commander was truly capable of changing everything. Suddenly, the monsters turned their attention to something else. Fatina quickly warned Arca and he immediately understood. The monsters' attention had shifted from the two of them to the city itself. They couldn't get everywhere, nothing could be blocked. But then Arch suddenly noticed something unexpected. The gate behind them was still not closed. Confused, he did not understand what was happening. A loud rumble suddenly rolled from the direction of the eastern gates. And through the dust, figures began to emerge. Fatina exclaimed with relief as soon as she recognized them. As reinforcements, when they rushed forward, Gaston shouted for everyone to push the monsters back, declaring that the travelers would protect their city. At the same time, the commander ordered the rear squads to stop and the riflemen and mages to begin the assault. "Fire without limits," he shouted. Fiery arrows fly through the sky and hit the monsters. Gaston roars for the men to charge the attack. And immediately everyone scattered across the entire battlefield to engage in battle with the monsters. A gigantic muscular man swung his huge sword and with one strike cut down several monsters at once. His companions gasped with delight and declared that this was exactly what they expected from their boss, the former Burank adventurer. The fat man reminded them, "Scavengers know the monster's weak spots better than anyone, so everyone must give their all." His companions responded eagerly. Meanwhile, conduct Arch scanning across the entire battlefield and carefully examine it. Carefully, Gaston then called to him, ordering them to hold the rear lines themselves and instead focus on the commander. Arch replied that he understood and immediately told Fatini to go with him. She agreed without hesitation. Near the gates, Doug carried even more arrows and potions to the front line, then quickly returned to fetch another load. Meanwhile, the commander gave the soldiers sharp orders to immediately evacuate and treat the wounded through the clerics. He warned the fighters not to allow the front lines to weaken. Long-range attacks by archers and mages will continue where there are no allies, and any monsters that break through are crushed by numerical superiority. In his thoughts, the commander admitted. The arrival of the traveler allowed them to focus on coordinating the battle from the rear, and even with this trump card, they barely hold the line. They could not afford to lower their guard. The monster commander had to be defeated as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a deep, menacing growl echoed over the battlefield. A gigantic monster approached it, burst forward, and spread a dark aura in the air. Gaston's gaze sharply widened in shock, and the commander's face twisted in horror as he shouted that the situation was simply absurd. The creature before them was a chimera. The chimera had the body of a lion, a goat's head, and a snake's tail. Its danger was extremely high because all three parts could use their abilities simultaneously. Its strength exceeded rank A. At the sight of this, Art froze in place and Gaston clenched his teeth and wondered if the creature was really a chimera, because he had never heard of one with a form as dark as darkness itself. One man trembled and asked why the tail was made entirely of bones, while another guessed whether it had mutated. The creature looked as if darkness were alive, almost like a breathing shadow. Understood, Art quickly realized this monster is the boss. It was not just strong, it was an irregular monster and most likely the core of the entire horde, a true commander. Art looked at Fatina and saw that she was trembling, completely frozen in place. In a trembling voice, she confessed that this was the very monster that attacked her village. Art quietly replied that he understood. In his thoughts, he put the puzzle pieces together. Now it became clear to him what explained the mystery of the 3 screams they had heard earlier. That terrible scream before was probably coming from the snake part of the chimera, and the fact that the tail looked bony could indicate the death magic could not fully reach its core. If this is true, then the key is to hit directly the main body of the lion. Suddenly, the chimera lunged forward at them. Fatina sharply inhaled in horror and shouted that it was rushing straight at them. Without wasting a second, Ark activated his quadrupole death burial. When the chimera lunged forward, people across the battlefield shouted warnings for Ark to be careful. Ark calmly replied that he would be fine. In his mind, he calculated, if they managed to defeat this monster, the whole battle would finally subside. Everyone was already on the verge of exhaustion, and if the fight dragged on even a little longer, they would all be wiped out. He decided that everything would be decided here. As soon as the chimera became visible within range, Ark drew his death skill. But suddenly a barrier appeared before him, completely destroying the attack. The chimera appeared and seemed to mock Ark. His strike was interrupted. Inside, Ark cursed everything in the world. He realized that this creature was protected by Satan's defense, and then he understood he had rushed too much trying to defeat it. When the chimera closed the distance, Fatina suddenly lunged forward and pushed Ark out of the way of the strike. The blow threw her into the air. Ark immediately spoke, asking if she was okay. Nearby, one of the soldiers who was affected by the gas froze in shock as soon as he realized that the chimera had magical protection. Another shouted that no one could have guessed such an ability from this creature. When the chimera turned its gaze to the soldiers, fear instantly spread among them. One soldier broke away and ran away, shouting that the monster was coming. The chimera relentlessly pursued them, and those who saw the attack froze in shock. One man muttered in disbelief that the tail could still move like that despite its skeletal state. A woman gasped, "It cuts like the blade of a whip." Panic quickly engulfed the troops. When the voices broke into despair, they shouted that the situation was hopeless. Head of the goat could block the magic, and the creature itself was moving too fast. At that moment, Fatina slowly got up. Ark was breathing heavily, realizing that unlike that fight in the forest, Chimera could now react every time it felt his magic approaching. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Fatina stepping forward again. They call her, but Fatina simply states that now it is probably her turn. The attackers realized that Chimera has magical protection, so one of the men shouted, they must all attack together. As soon as the creature turned its tail to them, it exhaled a heavy breath. The attack hit 3 men at onset. They froze on the spot. Their weapons clanged on the ground and they froze in shock, convulsively trying to make their own bodies move. Gaston clenched his teeth as soon as he recognized what was happening. In his mind, he broke down the attack into components, paralysis mixed with heavy breathing miasma. Before anyone could react, the Chimera released another wave of muscles and the remaining men were instantly paralyzed just the same. One man gritted his teeth and growled that the Chimera was immediately subject to several abilities. Another said that neither swords nor magic would reach this monster. The third warrior quickly raised his bow and suggested trying the arrows. He shot an arrow at the Chimera, and the beast effortlessly deflected the attack with a single flick of its tail. Then the Chimera glanced at the man and a contemptuous smile froze on her lips. The warriors froze, not believing their eyes. Some whispered that the monster was mocking them, while others through clenched teeth admitted even arrows were worthless against such an absolute monster. Surrounded by enemies on all sides, the Chimera let out a loud roar. While Ark watched the beast, he calculated its terrifying abilities in his head. The Chimera had the stature of a lion, the magical defense of a goat, and the poisonous, swampy, suffocating venom of a snake. All these powers together made her an incredibly dangerous opponent. Ark turned to Fatina and asked what she was going to do. But the chimeras roared so loudly that his anxiety only grew. He quickly realized the fog was rising and spreading faster than he expected. Even a swordsman would not be able to approach the creature safely. His thoughts were cut off by when he saw Fatina step forward. With each of her steps, bright light flared around her. Art froze in shock as the miasma vanished where she stepped. Then he finally understood why she was the magic breaker. Fatina calmly said she believed she would manage to get close to the chimera, and that this battle was her fight too. She reminded Ark that she had already gained enough levels and asked him to trust her. Ark realized she was right. Together they had become partners, so it would be reckless for him to act without her. Accepting her determination, he said he understood and would leave her the goat's head. A faint smile touched Fatina's lips as she approached the chimera. The monster's sharp eyes immediately fixed on her, but there was no fear in her despite the furious pressure of its aura. With each of her steps, the fog of darkness around vanished without a trace. In her heart, Fatina decided she would use every scrap of strength given to her. From afar, Ark watched her and wondered whether the wild feeling he sensed in her was bloodthirstiness or simply pure courage. Even the chimera reacted to that boundless aura flare she emitted. Meanwhile, Gaston silently doubted whether Fatina could really defeat such a monster on her own, despite the incredible stories he had heard about her abilities. The men watching the scene could not hide their admiration. One remarked that she was incredible, and another admitted just looking at her breath sent chills down the spine. Chimera lunged forward, and Fatina immediately rushed to meet it. When she closed the distance, she moved to the creature's side, but the chimera reacted sharply and turned to face her. In response, Fatina instantly jumped back to a distance. The chimera did not stop. It continued to attack repeatedly in series while Fatina continuously maneuvered, approaching its blind spots. But each time she tried to flank it, the monster responded at the same pace. Suppressing irritation with her tongue, Fatina realized, until she could completely outsmart the bees, the fight would drag on endlessly. Watching the furious clash, Gaston whispered that the fight was terrifying. Even without the chimera's breath attack, he doubted he could intervene safely. Others could only silently watch as the clash unfolded. No one dared to intervene. Fatina suddenly planted her foot firmly on the ground and lunged forward again. At the same time, the chimera charged straight at her. The monster jumped high into the air, but Fatina managed to slip under it, perfectly timed. With a swift swing of her sword, she cut his leg and wounded him. Ark and Gaston both shouted with delight, admiring the impressive move. The chimera landed and growled fiercely while Fatina kept rushing forward, not retreating. Gaston froze in surprise. He did not understand why she was coming straight at him. Then Fatina called out to him. In her mind, she knew, during a counterattack you cannot lose momentum. He quickly asked Gaston for permission to use the shield. At the best moment, Fatina sprang into the air and landed vertically right on Gaston's shield. Using the force as a springboard, she flew straight back to the chimera and wildly charged at it, while the chimera raised its bony tail and released a thick cloud of miasma. Fatina forced herself to break through the poisonous fog. Her breathing painfully stopped as she struggled with the toxin, yet she stubbornly moved forward without hesitation. As soon as she reached the chimera's skeletal tail, she shouted and with all her might slashed with her sword. A strong blow instantly tore the tail apart. Gaston's jaw dropped in shock when he realized that the combination of magic breaker and silver weapon had worked. Ark shouted with relief. The chimera's breath attack was finally sealed. And just as thick gunpowder filled the battlefield, he, looking around anxiously, called Fatina. The chimera roared fiercely while the dust slowly settled. Everyone froze in amazement when they saw Fatina clinging. She was holding onto the monster's back. One man in shock shouted that she was still holding onto him. Ark quietly murmured worriedly that she was acting too recklessly, but he immediately understood. This was their chance. Without wasting time, he activated his quadruple death burial. At that moment, Fatina struck the remaining head of the chimera with her sword, and the beast roared even more fiercely. The monster thrashed wildly in rage, and the furious force tore Fatina's sword so hard that it cracked and broke, tossing her high up while she was falling. Gaston rushed forward and caught her just in time. Praising her effort, he said she did well. Chimera continued to roar, rushing in furious rage until finally they noticed Ark approaching. For a moment, the monster twitched. Fatina saw Ark was already nearby, and just as the chimera opened its huge jaws toward him, she screamed in alarm. Before the creature could swallow him, his death skill activated. Raising his hand toward the chimera, Ark struck it instantly as soon as it lunged at him. In a moment, the creature's life ended. His huge body fell heavily onto the battlefield with a thud. Meanwhile, the crowd of monsters around began to disappear one by one. One man exhaled sharply as the monsters faded away. Near the city gates, Doug shouted that something had happened because no one moved on the battlefield anymore. The commander aloud wondered if Chimera had finally been defeated. Gaston muttered quietly, asking if this was really the end forever. Fatina shouted at Ark. When the dust finally settled and everyone saw how the chimera lay motionless and Ark stood firm on the battlefield, relief flashed in the eyes of both Gaston and Fatina. Without any hesitation, Fatina rushed to Ark and jumped into his arms. In Chapter 13, after the fierce battle, a victory celebration was held. The woman raised her voice and proposed a toast to all who saved Boltana. Everyone raised their glasses and shouted together, "Cheers!" The celebration began very quickly. People freely enjoyed themselves. A week had already passed since the Boltana raid. They were assessing the damage and making recovery plans for the surrounding areas, and everyone worked together to deal with the consequences. That day, the gathering was held as a small celebration. The Travelers Guild organized it to honor the end of the incident. Fatina said that it was finally over. Ark replied, he heard how the monsters in the dungeon had quieted and the upper floors were now empty. He explained that the appearance of monsters climbing out of the walls was caused by chimera. After the defeat, the creatures and minions disappeared. Fatina said that the monster capable of spawning such beings is terrifying. Ark agreed and admitted if it were just the two of them, but he was suddenly interrupted by a loud voice. Gale, who was swaying slightly drunk, loudly declared. The rookie, whom everyone looked down on, stood up against the skeleton ogre and even without hesitation faced a pack of monsters. Yet these same people still dared to call themselves adventurers. He called it a disgrace. One man sighed and grumbled that Gale was getting worked up again and that he was tired of hearing it. Another said that Gale himself hadn't even fought. Third supported these words. Angry, Gale shouted back, what did they mean by that? He grabbed one man by the collar and insisted that he allow them to take everything in his shop. So of course, he joined in himself. The man replied that nothing would matter if they all died anyway. Nearby, someone intervened and tried to calm Gale down. And behind, someone whispered, despite all these problems, Gale still managed to get the adventurers on their feet, and that man also joined. The man glanced over his shoulder and explained that he also had family in this town, so he couldn't just leave them to their fate. Ark and Fatina silently watched the commotion while Gale continued trying to attack the man, and others restrained him. Later, Ark learned that Gale encouraged hesitant travelers by showing them a skull as proof that Ark could be relied upon. That's how Ark understood it. And Ark admitted to himself, they really wouldn't have managed everything alone, and they owed Gale-san a lot. Second person who gathered the adventurers was Gaston. At that very moment, Gaston approached Ark and greeted him, noting that he was still alive and breathing. Ark replied that he owed Gaston his life again, but Gaston told him not to say that. After that, he explained that he wanted to introduce someone named Hans, who once served Hans' subordinate. Hans politely greeted Ark and Fatina, saying he was pleased to meet them. He explained that all this time he had been leading the assault squad from the rear and was sure they had crossed paths at the gates. Ark finally realized, since Hans was once Gast and subordinate, it made sense that the group worked so cohesively from the front line all the way to the rear. Hans replied that he hadn't expected to meet Gaston there, but in the end, it was a fortunate coincidence. He added that during the battle, the presence of Ark and Fatina was also decisive, and there was no better word than brilliant to describe how they defeated the Shadow Chimera. Because during the clash, the entire settlement came together as one. Now people cooperated both in mercenary work and in recovery, so everything was going smoothly. Hans, as a soldier, said he wanted to personally thank those who started it all. Ark modestly replied that he just happened to be there by chance. But before he could continue, Gaston slapped him hard on the back. Gaston said that even if he hadn't managed everything on his own, it was still an achievement to be proud of, and that he needed to face it head-on. He stated that Ark is now a full-fledged traveler. Fatina enthusiastically supported Gaston's words as soon as she heard them. Ark realized his previous answer was just another bad habit. He nodded and admitted that Hans was right. Then the two men shook hands and Ark thanked Hans for helping them during the fight. At that very moment, they were suddenly surrounded by a group of drunken adventurers. One shouted that they had finally found the stars of the show. Another told Ark not to hide in the corner and ordered him to join them. Someone else asked if they had just registered as adventurers and if they were even old enough to drink. Then someone loudly demanded the star among stars to tell them the full story of the battle. The night went on. The merry party did not subside. Next morning, outside near the building, Fatina froze, looking at her new sword in awe as if not believing her eyes. Gale called them early and explained, this is a true work of art forged from the bones of the Shadow Chimera. It was created together with the Guild Dismantler and specially made as a reward just for them. Ark thought to himself that Gale probably drank too much the night before celebrating the completion of the sword. The weapon would definitely come in handy while they continued exploring the dungeon. As for Ark himself, his instant deadly magic had already reached level 30. He spent accumulated points to increase the range to level 2 and the success probability to level 3, and also received a new special skill from the Chimera. The mastery seemed to impose status effects on opponents. Ark wondered if all this came from the Chimera's breath attack. If it could weaken the enemy's productivity, then it would become a valuable advantage for him. But suddenly Ark's thoughts were interrupted as he saw Fatina swing her new sword. With one strike, she cleanly and evenly split a tree in half. Fatina herself trembled from shock, then quickly rushed to Ark and asked if he had seen what had just happened. Ark dryly replied that yes, he was truly surprised. Then he remembered how Gale said the sword had some special effect. Since it was forged from such a powerful material, it probably contained a huge reserve of magical energy. That is why items like this are considered so valuable in trade. Hearing the explanation, Fatina smiled broadly and said she now understood everything. She added that she would thank Gale again. Emmy approached both of them. She said she heard a loud noise and decided they were somewhere nearby. Fatina greeted her joyfully and Emmy responded just as cheerfully, "Good morning." Ark asked if she had been looking for them. Emmy replied that she had been looking, explaining she received an inquiry about these two and she came to escort them as requested. Fatina guessed aloud who might be asking about them, or quietly muttered that he understood everything. If it somehow concerned the guild, he was interested, and since they only had a dungeon investigation plan left for the day, there was still enough time. Emmy smiled and politely asked them to follow her, and the two silently obeyed. While they were walking, Emmy suddenly called Ark. He asked her not to stop. She hesitated and admitted maybe it was already too late. But she still wanted to apologize. When she first saw the results of his ability, she laughed at them and now sincerely regretted it. Fatina looked surprised upon hearing the confession. Ark recalled the day he received those results and admitted to himself, yes, it really happened. However, he decided Emmy did not want to harm, she was simply shocked, and since the result did not meet someone's expectations, he could not blame her for such a reaction. Moreover, he thought, if he were in her place, he might have laughed too. Then Kirk calmed her down. Now he no longer worries about it. On the contrary, thanks to the instant death magic he discovered, he was able to fight and help defend the city. Hearing his answer, Emmy wiped a tear from her eye and sincerely thanked him. Fatina watched this moment with a radiant smile while the two reconciled. Soon they reached the second floor of the Adventurers Guild. Emmy informed them that those who called them were already waiting inside in the room ahead. When Ark and Fatina entered, they found 3 people already sitting inside. One of the women immediately greeted them and said that they had finally arrived even before. Before asking Ark if he was the famous instant death coin, she threw a question. Ark silently turned this nickname over in his head, confused. Then Emmy apologized and quietly left the room. When everyone sat down on the sofas, the woman thanked them for coming at the summons. She introduced herself Cecilia, S-rank adventurer and leader of her team. In Ark's thoughts, S-rank kept spinning again and again. Cecilia introduced the woman next to her as Veronica, their attendant, and the man next to her as Leonis, their paladin. Leonis politely greeted Ark and Fatina, saying it was nice to meet them. Ark introduced himself as Ark, called himself a mage, and introduced Fatina as a swordswoman walking beside him. He added that they were recently promoted to C-rank adventurers. Cecilia replied, "Nice to meet you," and immediately got down to business. She explained that she wanted Ark and Fatina to help their team conquer the Eastern Dungeon. Their group of 5 was gathered to push forward and break through to the lower levels. As payment, she offered 100 gold coins up front and another 200 after successful completion. Fatina shuddered in shock at such a huge sum and exclaimed that the village could live for 4 years on just 200 gold. Ark asked Cecilia to wait a moment. He admitted the situation seemed strange to him, even considering the recent anomaly in the dungeon. The dungeons in the region were still considered relatively low difficulty compared to the rest of the country. He inquired why an S-rank party needed his and Fatina's help, saying it just didn't make sense. Alone, Ark added to himself, if it were only about him, he might have taken the risk. Fatina was with him and he couldn't afford reckless decisions that might put her in danger. Leona silently noticed that Ark was much sharper than she expected. Cecilia barely smiled mockingly and admitted the question was valid. After that, she began explaining their reasoning. First, regarding strength, she turned to Veronica. Veronica nodded and said, and revealed that Fatina had the skill Sword Saint. Veronica explained that Fatina was already about level 30, but her level cap was 100, so her potential was unquestionable. Both Ark and Fatina visibly shuddered at the accuracy of her words. Cecilia said that Veronica possessed the skill evaluation and immediately, as soon as they entered the room, determined their abilities. Veronica continued the explanation and shifted her gaze to Ark. She called him an instant deadly mage and noted that although he was only level 1, his stats looked like those of a monster. Even after looking at the results a second time, she still considered his strength incredibly excessive. Ark quietly muttered that such a skill was rare and realized hiding his true power was no longer possible. Cecilia apologized and explained that the mission was extremely important to them as well. After that, she moved on to the second reason why they were recruiting them. According to her, 3 of them had already once tried to reach the lower levels of the dungeon. But during the expedition, they suddenly realized they lacked the necessary power and had to retreat with no options. Leonis admitted that the failure was humiliating, and Veronica gritted her teeth and called it the biggest mistake of her life. Hearing this, Ark wondered, was there really something incredibly powerful hidden deep in the dungeon unrelated to the recent anomaly? Then Cecilia explained the third, most important reason why they made their choice. She said that simply adding more power to the party is easy, but what was truly important was to find people who could be trusted. Returning from the northern region, she heard about the attack on the city, and no matter what she asked, the names Ark and Fatina kept coming up again and again in all the stories. For her, a person capable of inspiring such a level of trust and admiration definitely deserved a meeting. Cecilia apologized once again and added that she had decided. Ark already understood that Instant Death Coin was just a nickname. Ark replied dryly that he did not know that. Fatina remarked that the nickname sounded incredibly unlucky. Cecilia awkwardly laughed before saying that these were the very reasons that prompted them to choose the 2 and seriously consider the request. Ark asked one last question. Cecilia called at work earlier, so he wanted to know who exactly had made such a request. Cecilia answered cautiously. All she could reveal now was that the request came from one specific person. Mark fell silent. Inside, he already understood. Whoever that mysterious gentleman was, he had the influence to raise S-rank adventurers, offer absurdly large payment, and keep the details completely secret. That trust Cecilia spoke of sounded more like confidentiality. Although he really wanted to explore the lower floors of the dungeon, the whole story still seemed suspicious to him. Leona sighed and noted that she understood Cecilia was trying her best, but her explanation only made everything seem more suspicious. Cecilia flinched at the sharp criticism. Veronica added that the situation was so murky that even Evener would not be able to hold back laughter. In a panic, Cecilia rushed and ordered both of them to stop. She assured them that she was not trying to deceive them and had no intention of handing them over to monsters. There was no question of such a thing. She also said that she just wanted to behave like a true leader with dignity. Art exhaled quietly before turning to Fatina and asking for her opinion. Fatina replied that personally she had no problem accepting this offer. The 3 seemed like good people to her, and if something dangerous happened, Edge would become his sword and protect him. Ark nodded. Honestly, he was also drawn to reaching the lower floors. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that if they kept overcautious forever, they would lose their chance. Although the mission was indeed risky, maybe in the end it was worth it. Finally, Ark told Cecilia that they had decided to accept the request. Cecilia's eyes immediately filled with tears as she asked in disbelief if they were really serious. She joyfully declared how relieved she was, then quickly asked Ark to sign the form just in case. After that, the meeting ended. Ark stood up and informed Cecilia that for the next 2 days they would prepare equipment and supplies, then regroup again. Cecilia agreed, but before they left, she added one last detail. Green Labyrinth is the real name of the Eastern Dungeon, she explained. After everything, the day finally came. Raid on the Verdant Labyrinth was finally scheduled. A pack of hobgoblins burst into the party. Goblin people, a species that surpassed goblins both in intelligence and strength, lived on the middle tiers of the labyrinth. Ark quickly warned everyone about their arrival. Suddenly, a huge monster appeared before him, but before he could make another move, it was instantly cut in half. Leonis quickly cut through the surrounding hobgoblins, dealing with them effortlessly. With a smile, he declared that monsters were just small fry. Palamidin Leonis had the maximum level of 80, and his skills were taunt and steadfastness. Watching his performance, Fatina exclaimed with delight, and Ark noted that Leonis was the perfect tank. At that moment nearby, a wall sank and another monster burst out of it. It was a minotaur, a half-human creature belonging to a tribe that lived in the dungeons. A bull's head and almost 3 meters tall, with body strength equal to an ogre. Its rank was B. Leonis barely smiled as soon as he recognized the minotaur. Meanwhile, Veronica began humming a spell calling light to become a shield and protect her ally. Veronica, a cleric with a maximum level of 60, possessed the skills Holy Magic and Appraisal. The Minotaur swung its huge axe, but Veronica's protective spell strengthened Leonas's defense and he was able to block the blow with his shield. Leonas noted her support with admiration. At the same moment, Veronica activated her appraisal skill and quickly informed the team that the Minotaur's weakness was fire. Without hesitation, Cecilia sang a spell calling the flame to pierce through and burn the enemy. Instantly, the fire gathered around her sword, and she drew the flame lance and struck it down on the Minotaur, defeating it with a single blow. When the Minotaur was gone, only the hobgoblins remained. Cecilia calmly shifted her gaze to them and whispered another spell, summoning ice to seize and freeze the enemies. Immediately, ice burst from beneath the ground under the hobgoblins, hitting them and instantly knocking them down. Cecilia was a magical fencer with a maximum level of 80, possessing skills in all elemental magic and intermediate fencing. Watching the battle unfold, Ark couldn't help but feel warmed by admiration for the flawless coordination of the party. Each moved as if exactly at the peak of their abilities. He immediately understood. This is how S-class parties fight. The middle floors are cleared in moments. Fatina was also impressed. She noted the amazing harmony of the team and asked if Cecilia was both a fencer and a mage at the same time. Cecilia replied that she was effectively the only forward of the party, but thanks to her mastery of all elemental magic, she was able to lead the attack effectively. Leonas added, while he was breaking through the enemy line and Veronica was holding support, Cecilia could fully focus on the attack. Then Fatina, catching Veronica's gaze with admiration, took her hand and noticed that her gauntlets also worked like a magic wand. Veronica indifferently replied that their team easily takes everything up to A-rank monsters. Hearing this, Ark involuntarily admitted to himself, the S-rank title is not just for show, because their trio seemed to effortlessly glide through the middle floors of the labyrinth. Then Ark asked if there was an enemy they could not defeat together. Cecilia replied that the next area was a safe zone and suggested continuing the conversation there. Without delay, the group moved to the area. Upon arrival, Cecilia pointed to Trace's trail left in the safe zone and ordered everyone to sit wherever they wanted. Leona casually said she would just lie down against the wall. Anarch looked around and noticed. The upper safe zone also had a water source, but here a well-maintained stream. The strange essence of the dungeon crept into his thoughts again. Then Cecilia began explaining the obstacle that prevented them from reaching the lower tier, the gatekeeper. It was a golem. Golems are inorganic monsters brought to life by magic. Usually they were made from earth or stone, although some were composed of materials originating from the dungeon itself. Their shape and durability varied greatly, and since they did not feel pain, they held their attack until completely immobilized, making them extremely annoying opponents. Hearing this, Ark grumbled that golems in picture books always look cute but actually sound creepy. Fatina quickly replied that she already knew that, and Leonas added that the materials found in the dungeons were quite unique. Being extremely strong and highly resistant to magic, they became exceptionally rare. Cecilia explained, since there was only one golem, she believed that it could eventually be defeated if enough people gathered. Leonas agreed and said, after all, there was no choice, it had to be torn to pieces. Meanwhile, they quietly contemplate the words about rare materials, understanding this could be something important. Suddenly, someone sharply exhaled in shock. Cecilia was stunned to hear that instant death magic also works on skeletons. Art confirmed this, admitting he himself had long wondered why this ability affects creatures that are not really considered truly alive. Leonas noted that this topic falls under Veronica's competence and asked her to explain. Veronica began by saying that cleansing with holy magic can destroy the undead. But this was actually not an exorcism and was not intended to send souls to heaven. It simply removed the magic that had possessed them. Fatina noted that many people misunderstand this. Fatina asked if it had anything to do with ghosts at all. Veronica replied that it all depends on the type of undead. Monsters like Wraith fit the usual image because they were actually souls turned into monsters, while undead with physical bodes like skeletons and zombies are just corpses raised by dungeon mana to scare off invaders. She noted that zombies usually do not appear outside dungeons. Hearing this, Ark nodded and realized that there were no skeletons during the previous raid either. Veronica continued to explain, even in infected zones, the real trouble is the mana itself. Cleansing could drive it away for some time, but it could not prevent new mana from gathering again. And she suggested that instant death magic might work differently. Since the undead destroyed by instant death did not revive, perhaps the spell perceived the mana stored in the bodies of the undead as life force itself. By applying the idea of death directly to that mana, the undead were permanently destroyed. Veronica admitted this is only her personal theory. Leon jokingly responded to Veronica's explanation but didn't finish speaking. Cecilia cut him off. She wanted to clarify whether the same principle would work against golems. Veronica explained golems were essentially dolls connected by invisible threads of mana. If the mana supply could be completely severed, then the instant death magic could indeed work against them. Cecilia's face immediately brightened with hope. She admitted that they had not expected such a result, but now they finally had a chance to defeat the gatekeeper gate. Meanwhile, hearing Veronica's reasoning, Ark realized that his own abilities could indeed work exactly like that, although he honestly admitted he still did not fully understand them himself. Bowing respectfully, he thanked Veronica, saying her professional insight had proven extremely useful, to which Veronica responded with a proud grin, teasing that it was delightfully thrilling to be praised for interviewing someone below her level. Cecilia immediately cut off her arrogant remark. Veronica's reasoning made Ark understand that his abilities could really work the same way. Veronica responded with a proud grin, teasing that her professional insight was extremely useful even when she praised someone below her level. Veronica responded with a proud grin, teasing that praising the abilities of someone below her level was exceedingly pleasant. After that, the squad continued to push deeper into the dungeon when suddenly a horde of undead fell upon them. Ark noticed that this was the perfect moment to test their theory, as so many enemies had gathered together. Atina confidently declared that they would leave everything to her. She took a battle stance and gripped her sword tightly. She delivered one single devastating blow. Everyone except Ark was frozen in complete shock. He had already predicted this result in advance. Najitnya horde was destroyed instantly, leaving only one sole survivor. Veronica opened her eyes wide in shock and disbelief, demanding an explanation of what had just happened. When she saw the rest of the undead, Ark activated his instant death skill. Catafalque destroyed immediately. Arkvin explained that Fatina's sword was forged from the bones of the Shadow Chimera, although none of them expected such a devastating effect from it. Fatina happily confirmed that the weapon also allowed her to fight from a distance extremely convenient. Cecilia sighed with delight, admitting, the sword truly has incredible power, but only a true sword master can most likely draw out its full potential. She compared this to herself and sadly realized that she is still only at an intermediate level of fencing. Veronica carefully examined the undead creature that Ark instantly destroyed with his instant death. Leonis asked her about the results of the inspection. Veronica confirmed, as expected, the mana in the rhinitis had completely disappeared. She explained that under normal conditions, rhinitis creatures simply contracted together and continued to move even after injuries. Hearing this, Ark quietly muttered that their theory was now confirmed. Cecilia added that golems gather mana around joint areas. If that mana is removed, it will cover the whole body. Fatina exclaimed excitedly that this means Ark will become the key to victory over the golem. Leon stated confidently that he and Cecilia would focus on restraining the creature, leaving the decisive work to Ark. Cecilia nodded and agreed, noting how reliable he is. When the plan was decided, the group rushed further deeper into the dungeon. Cecilia checked from time to time that there were no enemies around as they advanced. Eventually, they reached the very floor that they had previously failed to conquer. Cecilia explained that the golem stood right in front of the gate, pointing the way to the lower floors. Beyond the gate lay an area resembling a sanctuary, and it seemed as if the golem existed solely to guard it. Ark quietly muttered to himself that the decisive moment had finally come. The outcome of the battle depended heavily on him. He gathered his strength, deciding not to repeat past mistakes. This time they definitely could not afford to lose. Then Leonis asked Veronica if she had fully replenished her potion supplies and if she was mentally prepared for the upcoming fight. Veronica calmly replied that she intended to cast protective magic from the very beginning of the battle. Then Cecilia addressed the entire group and declared that this time they would indeed reach the lower floor and accomplish their goal. Ark paused for a moment, wondering what exactly she meant by objective, but before he could think further, a sudden loud rumble rolled through the entire district. The source of the noise was the hero Alan himself and his companions. With incredible force, Alan charged straight at the golem and struck one of its massive arms, which instantly shattered. Cecilia and the others froze in shock as the heroic company suddenly appeared at that very moment. Ark's gaze fixed on a familiar face among them. It was Lin. She looked at him in shock. Ark, Lin blurted instinctively, and at that very moment Ark himself froze. He also did not expect to see her here. Silence fell as the tension between the two sides blossomed and enveloped everything around. Alan was the first to break this, thinking about who was standing before him. Before recognizing Cecilia, he greeted her casually and asked how much time had passed since their last meeting. Cecilia recalled rumors that Alan had been summoned to the country, though she did not understand why he was here now. She replied that it probably had been going on since the tournament. And he said that his victory over the golem looked impressive, almost without a scratch. Alan indifferently brushed off the praise and stated that it was just an average dungeon floor in a rural area. He explained that their party had recently recruited several new adventurers, so they came to help them gain experience. Nearby, Lin froze, staring at Eric. The shock was visible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, Alan turned back to Cecilia and asked why she was here, emphasizing that an S-rank adventurer had no reason to enter such a place. Cecilia quickly grabbed Eric and whispered for him to play along for now. Then she happily replied that it was just a coincidence. According to her, there was also a novice nearby and they were helping with guild training. Alan laughed knowingly and said that both had their own difficulties. Leon joined in with an awkward laugh. Suddenly, Art threw something over his shoulder. Fionn quietly appeared behind them and launched an attack, but Fatina immediately sensed her presence and intercepted the blow, preventing it from landing. Fionn froze in surprise but was simultaneously irritated. Fatina sharply looked at her and Veronica froze speechless. Fionn quickly retreated. Leonis immediately asked Veronica if she was okay. In her mind, Veronica was stunned. Fionn really intended to kill them. Fionn clicked her tongue irritably. Art could hardly believe that he had not noticed someone sneaking up from behind. Only Fatina's sharp senses managed to spot the attack in time. Cecilia angrily demanded an explanation of what Alan meant by that. Alan calmly replied that this beast girl was probably the swordmaster he had heard rumors about in the city, and admitted he did not expect her to stop Fiona's attack, even praising Cecilia for finding such a talented person. Cecilia firmly refused. A minor fight among the squad is an adventure, that's one thing, but an attempted murder breaks the guild rules, and Alan should know that no worse than anyone else. But as soon as she said this, she felt that something was terribly wrong. Alan laughed and she became even more anxious. Suddenly, Alan burst out laughing loudly and everyone froze, staring at him with disbelief. He stated that both already knew why they came here, and the main question was who would stand in each other's way. Hearing this, Art became confused about the true purpose. Did both Alan and Cecilia enter the greenish labyrinth for the same reason? He muttered in disbelief, wondering if they were telling the truth. Veronica trembled, warning Cecilia that something was wrong because their level caps did not match. Alan's level reached 100 and Leonis and Cecilia froze in shock. Meanwhile, Lin approached Alan and asked how he could do such a thing. Before she could continue, Alan coldly narrowed his eyes and said it was not such an important matter. If she doesn't understand, she'd better keep her mouth shut. Cold sweat instantly broke out on Lin's body. She nodded nervously before falling to the floor. Watching how everything unfolded, Ark wondered if Lin really did not understand what had happened. At that moment, Dorothea began to chant a spell, summon the flames to explode and shatter her enemies. The fire gathered around as the magic took shape. Seeing the threat, Cecilia immediately shouted for everyone to scatter. Dorothea cast a spell and a huge burst of flame erupted toward them. Thick smoke filled the battlefield and a cough stuck in the throat from the burning air. When the smoke finally cleared, the surrounding area turned into ruins from the explosion. Eris stepped forward first. The level of the Holy Knight jumped from 80 to 90 and her abilities included Taunt, Tenacity, and Defense modifier. Although she assured that she held no personal grudge against them, she still warned there would be no mercy. Next to her stood the trickster Fionn. His level also reached 90. She had skills in daggers, agility, and stealth. She glared fiercely at Fatina, saying that it was Fatina who angered her and promised to cut her into pieces. Meanwhile, Dorothea shifted her gaze to Ark. The mage's level had already surpassed 80, and he had fire magic, water magic, and magic enhancement. She mocked Ark for daring to call himself a mage. Then Alan stepped forward. The Holy Knight had already reached level 100 and possessed skills such as sword fighting, wind magic, and attack modifiers. Looking directly at Cecilia, he calmly stated that now she would no longer be able to catch up with him. Cecilia could not help but recall a duel that took place years ago, but she realized that Alan, standing before her, was incomparably stronger than before. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden feeling of a piercing gust of wind. Before she could recover, her body was brutally slammed against the wall. Blood splattered from her mouth. The blow crushed her inward. Fatina immediately called out to her anxiously, but Fionn coldly warned, "Do not look away," and ordered her to focus on the opponent before attacking again. Meanwhile, Leon found himself trapped in a fight with Eris. Her devastating power pushed him back, and he was stunned that such might could be hidden in a body with such a small stature. Feeling like he was suffocating, Leon called out to Veronica to support him with magic. Veronica screamed that she had already cast the spell, but even with the enhancement, both of them continued to be overwhelmed by the power of Eris, which was simply undeniable. Watching the battle unfold, Ark realized the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Everyone on his side was being pushed back. Dorothea noticed how Ark was watching the battlefield while avoiding her flames and said that he was strangely calm under pressure. However, she asked how he would handle her next attack. Suddenly, an alarm flared and Ark focused all his attention only on it. Dorothea threw an ice needle, and sharp icy spikes burst from the ground with furious force. In a moment, Ark was behind her, confident that he was even faster and could knock her unconscious with a single blow. But just as his strike was about to connect with her, Dorothea activated the protective skill Ice Dress. An icy barrier flared around her. Smirking boldly, she asked Ark if it hurt. Ark landed on the ground and clicked his tongue in frustration. A painful warning spread through his arm. Nearby, Fatina and Fionn were still settling scores in a fierce clash. Fionn suddenly laughed and ordered Fatina to look behind before delivering a powerful strike, that strike threw Fatina backward straight toward Ark's position. At that moment, Ark realized the entire exchange had been meticulously planned as a trap, but time ran out. It was already too late. Alan raised his sword high into the air, and lightning crackled cruelly around the blade. Activating the sword art skill, he unleashed a devastating strike, and a powerful shockwave rolled across the battlefield as Alan shouted the name of the technique. Sonic Blade. Ark paled and stared at the incoming attack and the alarm signal as a huge slash rushed straight toward Cecilia and the others. Fatina screamed and desperately called Ark's name. After Alan's attack hit, the battlefield was left in complete ruin. Thick dust hung in the air as silence descended over the devastated area. Fionn was the first to break the silence and shouted angrily at Alan that his attack came too close to the point of hitting them. Alan calmly replied that he was just relying on her ability to handle it. Fionn sharply pulled back, not believing it, and asked what he meant. Nearby, Dorothea grumbled irritably that the quarrel was too loud. At that moment, Air called Alan and pointed toward all the people who. Ark and Fatina remain the only ones still standing, although their bodies are covered in wounds. Ark realized he survived only thanks to the protective spell and extremely high HP. He quickly glanced at the others, and he saw that they were all still alive, though none could continue fighting. Fatina shielded herself with her sword from the blow, so she received the fewest wounds, while Ark sorted out the skirmish in his mind. He clearly understood what Alan's party had done. They deliberately drove the group into a split to make it look like they wanted to defeat each opponent separately. But in reality, it was a complete distraction to create a breach for a devastating group attack. The Ark team lost even before they could use their synergy and specializations. And Ark realized with growing horror, Alan's party specializes in fighting other people. If someone had not fought from the very beginning with the intention to kill, surviving against them was almost impossible. Yet Ark still hesitates, imagining how he would use instant death magic against people. Not having that ability, his combat characteristics and skills were by no means equal to theirs. The only thing he had left. Only his colossal mana reserve. Summoning Fatina, Ark ordered her to throw Magic Breaker into the battle with everything she had left. Although Fatina was flustered, she immediately agreed. Alan said their rescue was just luck and asked if they were even going to keep fighting. According to him, they no longer needed to resist. At that moment, Lynn screamed at Arka in despair, begging him to stop and run away. Hearing her voice, Alan suddenly realized something. He glanced at Ark and remarked that he had almost forgotten what Ark was, a complete mess. As soon as Lynn looked into Alan's eyes, fear swept through her entire body. Ark responded with the same look. And he understood it was precisely because of this that he was reborn, to stand in the way of people like him. Without any hesitation, Ark activated the madness skill. Dark shadows instantly burst from beneath the ground, and thick miasma poured over the battlefield. During the shock, Fionn released gas, and Dorothea looked around, confused. Alan's face twisted with anger when he realized the mirage had paralyzed him. Meanwhile, Ark continued to hold insanity. This skill was scaling, and he quickly burned mana to maintain the field. Fatina froze in shock and asked what kind of power it was. Ark immediately explained. It was similar to Chimera from that time, then sharply shouted for her to step back. As long as he had mana left, he could continue to weaken their enemies. He pushed Fatina to seize her chance in the attack, reminding her that she was the only one who could still move freely. At the same time, Lin wondered why she herself was not affected by the miasma. Then Alan suddenly spoke in a cold, threatening tone, warning Ark not to underestimate him. Despite the thick meaty haze corroding his body, Alan forced himself to move. As soon as Ark felt this, anxiety sharply overwhelmed him like a wave. He immediately understood what Alan was preparing for. If Alan released that attack again, they would have no second chance to survive. Alan coldly declared that it was all over. At that very moment, Fatina dashed forward purely by instinct. Her sword master skill had already fully analyzed the final sword technique that Alan was about to unleash, and it was not the fake double she had used before. This time a true reproduction of the technique itself. Fatina swung her sword with incredible force and released a devastating slash. Alan's eyes suddenly widened in shock. In a moment, he realized his mistake. He failed to finish the fight with a single devastating blow, and this pause turned into defeat. Alan screamed in disbelief, and Fatina sharply shouted the name of the technique, Sonic Blade. A powerful blade strike cut through the battlefield and hit Alan along with his companions. Being a sword master, Fatina perfectly copied Alan's final move after seeing it only once. When the fight ended, Ark froze and, not hiding his surprise, looked at her and asked if the technique she had just used was really what he thought. Fatina herself looked confused. She honestly admitted that she could not fully explain it. She just somehow knew how to perform this move. He shook his head in amazement and remarked that her skill continued to impress him every time. Meanwhile, Alan and the rest collapsed to the ground unconscious. These are bodies covered with wounds. Only Lin remained standing. She froze, staring foolishly at what was before her, trembling and quietly, confusedly whispering about what had just happened. Art glanced at her side and immediately ordered Fatina to check the others. Fatina agreed at once. They flew in to help their wounded comrades. As soon as Fatina left, Art became unclear about what exactly he should say to Lin. Part of him thought it might be better to just let her make the decision herself. After a brief pause of hesitation, Ark finally spoke to her. Still trembling, Lin slowly turned to him and quietly uttered his name. Mark was already about to say something but stopped. Shaking his head, he instead muttered that at least she was safe. Before he could continue, Alan suddenly moved. Despite his injury, he grabbed Lin and pressed her to himself, taking her hostage. Ark's eyes widened sharply in shock when Alan threatened if Ark made even one move, he would kill her. Alan threatened Ar not to move and warned if Art took a single step, Lin would be killed. Art clenched his teeth in anger and, obeying Alan's order to stay silent and keep away, Ark for now does not move, and Fatina looked at him with anxiety. Art's order forced Alan to release Lin, and he asked if this was really the behavior of an S-rank hero. Alan immediately silenced him. With fierce reproach, Ark reminded Alan that he was a nobody and just trash who should not interfere with his ambitions. Watching Alan, Ark had no idea why the hero had lost his composure and gone so far in the matter. Could the reason they came to the labyrinth really be that important? But Ark forced himself to focus on the main thing to save Lin. He thought again about using the Madness Zone but doubted whether he could activate it in time and whether he had enough mana. For a moment, instant kill flashed as an option, but he immediately rejected it. He was afraid that Lin would also be affected. While Lin was puzzling over why Ark was so desperately trying to save her, at that very moment Cecilia suddenly spoke. She told Alan to stop and emphasized that the children knew nothing. Fatina sharply turned to her, stunned. She had come to her senses again. Cecilia apologized to Ark and Fatina, explaining that it would be safer if they never learned the truth. She added that Lin was also not informed. And Cecilia revealed why Alan's group came to Verna's labyrinth. To get the key hidden deep in its lower levels. When Ark asked what kind of key it was, Cecilia explained it was an artifact of colossal power. So far, Alan had been collecting such keys during the party under King Krisha's orders. She thought their people were still clearing the dungeons in the north and did not understand why they were already here. Alan laughed arrogantly at her misunderstanding and pointed out that she should have noticed their levels back then. Cecilia muttered something to herself as realization slowly overwhelmed her. With a crowd of distrust in her voice, she whispered that it could not be. Smiling arrogantly, Alan confirmed her suspicion and said he already had the aqua key. According to Alan, the power of the key was incredible. It removed the world's immutable upper limit and allowed its owner to rise to unimaginable heights. He claimed that this power rewrote the very rules of the world. If a single key could grant such a miracle, then obtaining both the green key and the fire key meant making him godlike. Our question was whether this was not the entire part of King Creech's orders. Alan outright rejected the king, stating that he no longer cared about the antics of that old fool. He shouted that he would kill anyone who stood in his way. Hearing this, Art could not hold back his thoughts. What happened to Alan? And did he always carry such colossal ambition within him, or had the power already consumed him and erased his humanity? Suddenly, Alan screamed in pain as his body convulsively twitched. Ark stared at him, not understanding. While Alan staggered and demanded to know what was happening, at that very moment Lynn slipped out of Alan's grip. Without hesitation, Ark rushed to her. At that very moment, Alina's body lit up. The key slipped from him and rose into the air. In a moment, the ground was shaking wildly, completely frenzied. Cecilia held her breath, wondering if an earthquake was happening right inside the dungeon. Beneath them, the ground crumbled. The Ark surged forward to Lynn at the speed limit, reaching out to save her palm. He managed to grab her just as the floor beneath them completely gave way. Together they plunged down into the abyss, and darkness swallowed everyone around. As soon as they hit the ground, Lynn realized Ark had used his cloak to soften her fall. Lifting the cloak back, Ark calmly explained that the floor suddenly collapsed right beneath them and they flew into an unknown zone, but Lynn shook her head, clearly meaning something entirely different. Ruddy tears rolled down her face as she asked why he was helping her at all. She could not understand it. If earlier he had abandoned the person he once rejected, now he risked himself to save her, or simply, by the way, waved it off, saying he did not want to see his childhood friend taken by death. Hearing these words, Lynn's attention could not be ignored, and he moved his hand to the wounded arm, and anxiety instantly spread across her face. She ordered him not to move. The wound looked serious, but Ark waved it off, insisting it was just a consequence of their fall. Lynn immediately said that he was injured defending her. Without any hesitation, she cast healing magic, and the wound on Ara's hand disappeared instantly. Looking at this with surprise, Ara whispered that the holy magic of the high priest was truly incredible. Lynn trembled a little before calling him an idiot, and Ark simply replied quietly. Thinking that Lynn had protected everyone before and that she also did not deserve to die for them, he still admitted, no matter what, even if everything never returns to how it was before, it no longer matters. Hearing this, Lynn silently cried. Art added that escaping from this place now was the first priority, so everything else should be postponed and they should act together. Lynn quietly nodded in agreement. After a short pause, Lynn asked about the strange magic that had previously stopped her companions. She did not understand why it did not affect her. Ark explained. His madness skill could be rejected by Magic Breaker under certain conditions. Since Lynn had the blessing of the goddess Fatina, it probably decided that her skill would not affect her due to some form of sacred resistance. Lynn was stunned. Ark had managed to think so far ahead during the chaos. Compared to him, she was just standing still in confusion, unable to keep up with the verdict. As they continued walking, Ark suggested, since they had fallen down, they should find a direction from which they could climb back up. He added that if another large pitfall happened nearby, it meant someone else might have fallen there too. Lynn nodded and agreed. While moving through the area, Ark noticed wooden structures scattered around. This tier looked completely different from the upper floors. Suddenly, Lynn noticed someone from afar and sharply exhaled in shock. Ares returned to them with surprise, and nearby Alan was sitting on the ground, badly wounded and breathing with difficulty. Without hesitation, Ares begged them for help. She admitted that they did not deserve support, but their potions were no longer enough. In despair, she begged Lynn to heal Alan with her magic. Alan weakly told her that it was enough. Ares suddenly fell silent and turned to Alan. With a stern face, Alan declared that from now on they were enemies and refused to humiliate himself by asking for help. Ares immediately objected sharply, warning that if he remained in that state, he would die. Lynn instinctively stepped forward, intending to help, but froze when Alan suddenly called out to Ares, "Stop." He forcefully gulped air and through clenched teeth repeated, "She needs to stop." Watching the exchange, Art thought, one word is not enough to decide anything. He looked up and saw another colossal hole nearby. He did not know how many people were scattered from each other, but Fatina and others could have fallen somewhere very close. At that moment, a familiar voice echoed through the territory. Fatina exclaimed with relief as soon as she finally found them, and Giannis immediately asked Ark if he was okay, checking for several minutes to ensure everyone was safe. The group began discussing their situation. Art noted that this place was clearly different from the floor they had been on before and asked if anyone knew anything about it. Cecilia explained. At first, she thought they had simply fallen to a lower level, but the atmosphere here was too strange for it to be an ordinary dungeon lair. She wondered if anyone had noticed. Since they arrived, they had not encountered a single monster. Art silently agreed with her opinion. It was unnaturally quiet nearby. There was no sign of any life anywhere. And despite this silence, there was no feeling of a safe zone here. Meanwhile, Fatina gently squeezed Lin's palms and said how relieved she felt seeing her safe. Lin quietly thanked her. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a voice. The place they had just entered was the deep layers. Everyone turned to Alan. Quietly gloating, he stated that there could be no mistake about this. They were already in the deep layers of the dungeon. He added, if they had simply fallen there by the usual way, they would have did so. All the strange events around them were somehow connected. Cecilia narrowed her eyes and remarked that Alan sounded as if he knew too much about this matter. Alan was about to confirm, but as soon as he tried to continue, he was interrupted by a violent coughing fit. The heirs hurriedly urged him to be silent. Then she explained that they had already experienced something similar before in the northern prison, known as the Aqualabyrinth. As soon as the anomaly began there, she saw a flash of light burst from Alan's body. Art began to argue that in the previous case it did not start from the middle layer as it did now, but he did not finish. Suddenly, a deafening roar thundered throughout the area. Alan calmly said that it had already arrived. The next moment, giant branches wildly burst out from the ground. Art screamed in shock and demanded to know what that was. Leonis froze in horror when it dawned on him. Everyone stood frozen in place where they were. The giant creature silently rose before them. In one step, the earth beneath him cracked and split apart. Alan barely smiled before revealing her true essence. She was the ruler of the deep layers.